Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first order of business is the budget review. Michelle, welcome to the table.
You get to be first this time. I see that. Actually, I think I saw Paul in the elevator that last week, and I said, whatever it takes, I can't follow you ever again.
And I get the same thing twice in one day.
I know, you poor thing. I think this evening, instead of preparing and sending out lots of information and in the memo, I had notated just a couple of quick charts. But those quick charts are all centered around property tax revenue and is probably essentially the biggest question mark, I would say, in the whole budget for general fund right now. So our property tax revenue, just to kind of take a couple steps back and go through the process, and then Scott is also here this evening because part of the conversation will probably turn toward tiered tax rate. But for property taxes, every year we get a constant year certification memo from the Maryland State Assessor's Office of Taxation, Assessments and Taxation. Typically, when we receive that memo, I would, in the budget, do exactly what their statistics show. Their statistics showed this year when we received it in February that even though this was year 2 of our triennial assessment, they anticipated that our assessed value was going to decrease over our current year, fiscal year 18, by 0.9%, so almost 0.1%. And it doesn't seem like a large impact, but when you think about every penny on the tax rate is about $258,000, when you start coming back and you do percentages of your assessed value, it starts becoming a bigger number. So one of the things that Valerie and I started looking at was one of the charts that's in your book, and it is in section 3, page 6. It's a chart that I know Councilmember Mintzner refers to often because it shows a 25-year history, and it shows our assessed values, it shows our tax revenue, but it also shows information to the far right-hand side of the actual tax rate for the city, county, state, and what that total rate is overall, again, for a 25-year history. When we took a really close look at the information in our records for the last couple triennial assessment periods, in year 2, we have shown sustainable growth. And again, looking back, so just for reference for all the new members, if you go to actual 2011, 2012, it's going to be in the second column. You'll see a negative 11.2%. So really, I'm starting there, and that's my year 1, because that was the first year, and it's when the market and the assessed values really took the first dramatic decrease. And that very next year, the percentage underneath there, you're going to see that our assessed value increased by 2.9%. The following year, 1.2%, so that's year 3. Then you're going to see another negative 4.6. Again, that reflects year 1 of our new assessments. Following that, we had a 3% growth in year 2. So that means I'm on actual fiscal year 16, and you'll see the 3% growth. So following that logic, Valerie and I are very hopeful that we will not actually in fiscal year 19 see this 0.9% decrease, but we are hoping and have included in the proposed budget a 1% growth. And again, doing that, looking at the prior triennial assessment periods and what our record has been in year number 2. The reason for the state assessor's office for the big decrease again in year 2 all centers around what they have currently estimated we are going to see in appeals and abatements. Right. And they feel like, despite where we are in year 1, that those appeals and abatements will be large enough that we would actually see additional decline. Again, I'm hopeful that most of that, the majority will occur in year 1 as people get that new assessment in front of them. Of course, I do have to recognize, and I will say that we definitely have larger customers, especially on the commercial side, who, you know, once a year, every year, they got people within their corporation who just file a tax appeal. The appeal process, I'm sorry.
When you use the term commercial, I remember a property manager once telling me, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that they processed about 400 appeals themselves in a single year for various properties throughout the city that were largely for multi-residential properties. So when you're using the term commercial, are you using it to include both residential commercial and regular commercial, or are you strictly talking about
Yes.
Commercial?
Both, in this sense.
Okay.
But I'll give you, I'll give you an example. So we have a large, I think it's Washington Real Estate LLC, and Scott would probably remember the actual incorporated name better than I do. But basically, it is the entire shopping plaza at Garland Grove minus Walmart. And so every single year, we know that there is going, through the state assessor's office, that there's going to be an appeal process from them. So from a state assessor's office, the appeal process, there's multiple layers and levels, and it doesn't always go to court.
And they estimate those numbers too.
They do.
So that's why, when we made the decision to go ahead and include a 1%, we felt pretty comfortable in looking at the history, because even the history of the appeals have not come in as high as what they're estimating.
Correct. So when they say commercial, what happens with an entity such as that, they don't just look at what someone assesses the value or necessarily on a homeowner who's residential, but they also take into effect income. So they can look at a 3-year average, and so if they have, vacant space or empty tenant slots for whatever period of time, they'll get credit for that in their assessed values. The way that I understood it after talking to our local assessment office, then our assessors would indeed lower that original assessment value. And if they've already paid on the original bill, then we would issue a credit, or if they hadn't paid, they would get a revised information
Usually,
statement.
it's usually a credit. It's usually a straight-up abatement that goes against the tax bill that they get refunded for.
So if you go back to last year and the 1% increase that we saw for 17-18,
Yes,
that factors in, actually, considering that we have a tax increase in there, that factors in probably 2% loss.
no, so when you looked at the assessed base value in column number 2, it does not take into effect anything we're doing on the actual tax rate or the actual dollars that we're getting, but the
So
true
year one
value of
a
our
new-
assessed base.
So year one, a new reassessment, which would have been 17-18,
Correct, that was our
showed us
first
a
year.
1% increase.
Right, and at the time, so in February of last year, to kind of put this in perspective, when we got our initial assessment, it was a 3.0, I'm just gonna round, because I'm gonna get the number incorrect, but it was like a 3.1% that they were anticipating that we were gonna see as a decline. And again, the majority of that was based on all their estimation of where the large dollars we were gonna see in this abatements and appeals.
But in actuality, it was a 1% increase.
Right now, correct.
Okay, all right.
Based on what we're seeing, where we think we're gonna end fiscal year 18, yes.
Okay.
And we have not trended to ever hit the forecast that SDAT's done as far as appeals, the cost of appeals.
Right.
We have not hit that in at least I've been doing it 8 years now, in the last 8 years. It's always been short. We've always been short, to the good.
All right.
And so again, not differing from there very significantly, because they do the same thing. They're utilizing our database, they're seeing all of our components, both commercial and residential, and they're estimating based on where the assessments were, what could potentially be appealed and abated. So their information is very, I don't want us to think it's not very solid. It is. Typically, in most years, I would have went with a straight decline,
And
but
it's also
this year,
a snapshot.
it
It's
very
just
much
a
is. Of a very specific,
specific
yes.
time, so not an
And
average, not, yeah.
And it will change every month by a little bit. based on the activity that they're seeing in the appeals and the abatements. So we're assuming that when we start, we're going to start fiscal year 19, the same as fiscal year 18, even stronger with a 1% growth. But then in looking at where all of our other information, both our revenue sources and where our revenue could potentially grow and or decrease, and also looking at all of our expenditures that were initially requested, looking at our annual debt service requirements and some contractual obligations that we had, we still had to come back one more time. And so where we finally landed with property tax revenue is we have this 1% growth built in. But in addition to that, we have an additional $776,000 in revenue that we needed in order to balance the budget and what is before you in this proposed document. And that keeps all current service levels exactly the same as what we're providing in fiscal year 18. It allows for us to do the increases that we have committed to in collective bargaining units, the increases that we know we're going to see on the employer benefits side. It's also going to help us cover some increasing annual debt service costs, as well as help us in fiscal year 19 get back to the point where we are investing annual pay-go dollars for infrastructure projects, capital projects. That $776,000, so I'm going to go back just a few pages, and it's back in section 1, and we started to look at it a little bit last week. And I'm just going to have you flip it to page 4. So that $776,000 in revenue, we could do it in a variety of ways. You know, one of the topics that had been discussed was the potential for a multiple or a tiered tax rate system. So we could implement something on that. If we did absolutely no tiered tax rate, the $776,000 is equivalent to an overall 3-cent tax rate increase. And again, I'm not saying that that's what we're necessarily recommending. It's just the equivalent to that. The chart on page 4 of section 1 actually was, I'm going to show Scott, was one that he helped and actually I think looks similar to other charts that he shared in prior brief conversations on the concept of a tiered tax rate. And Scott, you know, we're calling you here because I think last week there was some additional conversation and questions on where we were with implementing and how feasible it was to implement these tiers. And so before Valerie or I spoke for you, I thought it best to.
Well, the concern I had the last time I was here was that we were not able to break down each individual tax class into owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied. We have since that time worked with the software vendor, and we are now able to take each individual class, and we could potentially set a separate tax rate. For example, residential has owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied. We could set a separate tax rate for each of those, for that sub-classification, owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied. We could do that we could really do that for anything based upon that, for residential townhouse, residential condo, those are the 3 that have owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied. Apartments, the apartment tax classification, all non-owner occupied, so we wouldn't have to worry about that. But we could set a separate tax rate for all apartments under the apartment tax classification. Because of the information that SDAT provides us, that is as far as we can go. We can't drill down further to say, if you own a residence, you don't live there, so it's non-owner occupied, and it has 1 unit or 2 units, we can't go that far because we don't get that information from SDAT. We would not be able, even if we could get it externally, say from rental license or somewhere, we would not, the software would not be able to make that distinction within how it calculates and bills out the tax. So that, as far as we can go, is the designation of owner-occupied versus non-owner occupied within an individual tax class.
And last week, let's just make sure that we kind of continue on the same page as we were week after week as we do this. Last week, it seemed like the majority here was against that idea then. So you were not interested in the Rs, the TH, or the Us in any way because you could not break those down any further. But you were interested in the possibility of a tiered tax rate for the M apartments, the RC, non-owner occupied, and the CC, non-owner occupied.
Okay, those are all non-owner occupied. There are
Right.
no owner occupieds in those
And there are,
three.
right. So I just want to make sure that that's what I understood last week, and that's where you all were last week, and if you've had any different thoughts on that.
And just to give you an idea, under the M class apartments, there are 415 parcels.
Okay, can you define these three classes for us?
Apartments are units of four, or are parcels of 4 units or more. Okay? Residential goes, if it's residential non-owner occupied, that can be a single family,
Right, I
2 or
understand,
3.
but These three is what I'm.
But apartments is 4 or more.
Okay, what about the other two?
Residential commercial is where it is a parcel that is more than 50% residential but has commercial space within it. We have 14 of those parcels in the city.
It's got multiple uses.
Yes,
Around 4.
it's yes, it could be, exactly. And I think that's what some of these, I have the other sheet here, where I could actually, give you an address at some point to
Now,
show you what that is.
and Can I just ask you, as we get to these things, based upon some of the theories I think we collectively have, I hear essentially that a residential unit that is 4 units, when they do the appraisal, what it's worth, the assessment, it's basically the same as looking at a single-family home with the same amount of everything. They don't take into consideration that it's a profit-making thing, right? Is the same thing true, however, on the mixed-use commercial and residential? Do they look at the commercial space and give that a separate assessment different than if it was all residential?
I honestly don't know. I mean, we could find out. We could ask Melissa,
And-
we could ask Estet about how they do that.
Okay, and since there are only 14 of them in the city, do you know if these are units that have multiple residents in them versus single residents or 2 residents?
I do not, but being that there are 14 of them, it would not be difficult
To figure it out.
figure it out.
And also, it probably
that
wouldn't
was
make much of
commercial-
a difference in money whether we included them or not.
Residential,
right?
commercial.
RC,
That was
yeah,
residential, commercial.
And you can see that in the chart.
And the third one was,
CC.
CC, commercial condo. That is predominantly, there's an amorphous definition for what constitutes a condominium versus what constitutes a single-family home, what constitutes a townhouse. But in this case, commercial condo would be predominantly a commercial building with some living space in it. I would, there's no, if you look in the procedure manual for SDAT, it does not give you a definition of what a commercial
and how
condo
many of
is.
them were there?
Geez, 30? I can tell you for sure. Let me just switch back.
But they
Commercial,
are,
yes, there's 30. That's a good guess.
With
30.
their
but
assessed
they're
values.
predominantly commercial
Yes,
properties.
yes.
They just have some degree of residential.
Some degree, yeah. Yep.
And those aren't
I'd like to see an example.
owned, owner occupies, those are.
Well, here, let me give you an example, and again, I'm gonna backtrack on the resident part. One of those, one of the parcels that's a commercial condo, those group of buildings on Mill Street that sit by the nursing home, those are all classified as commercial condos.
Are those doctor's offices?
The doctors, yeah, there's doctor's offices, insurance agencies, those kind of things.
Gotcha.
Eastern Boulevard, all of the ones that sit, I think, like on the Eddie's Tire side, those are commercials, those are classified as commercial condo.
Okay, so they
I'm
just,
interested in getting rid of that category.
so am I. Matter of fact, if I were gonna do two-tiered, especially for year one, I wouldn't go beyond apartments, the M class.
So not even residential, commercial?
There's 14 of them in the entire city. The amount of revenue
You know,
that
it's
would be
gonna get you,
generated.
if we even looked at the largest 25% increase, it's 23 grand.
Yeah,
so
it's not,
Yeah,
the
it's not
squeeze
worth
isn't worth the juice.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And M is easy. As soon as you get beyond M, we all start going, what are they? Including our citizens, what are they? So I think everybody knows what apartments are.
Yeah.
And if everybody understands that apartments have to have a minimum of 4 units or a minimum of 5 units to be an apartment.
So Scott, let me ask you a question.
Four
So
more.
just, so now we're at just M
Just at M.
possibly.
Let me ask you a
Okay.
question. Wilson Boulevard, the apartments that are,
Kenley?
call them condos, no, not Kenley. Yeah, I guess it is,
By the
yeah.
food line, or by the, whatever that is now?
It's before the food line.
Yes.
It's
on the
right
right-hand side
after
of road,
the,
Right by the church.
yeah, right by the church, yeah. What are they classified as?
They should be they're condos.
Are they? Or
But-
something?
Are they,
But
are
see,
they
that's the
owner
difference.
occupied
What we would
condos?
classify as a condo
Are they townhomes?
is not necessarily, those may be townhouses, those could be just straight residential. Let me see if I can find,
They're individual.
converse amongst yourselves, let me see if I can find.
Because we've done work in there, so.
Okay, well, that's what I was asking,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and
I
that's.
thought that,
They're
mean,
individually,
I knew someone at one
Woodbridge.
point in time, years ago, who
Woodbridge,
actually,
Yeah, there's two different developments in there.
One's in the city, one isn't. Yeah,
One closest to the shopping area is the apartment style.
That's Kenley. So Woodbridge is where he's talking about where there's an HOA, which is next to the funeral home. Am I right? Is that where you're talking
that's what I'm
about?
talking about, yeah.
Those are condos.
Okay,
That's what I'm saying, they're two different.
Right, yeah, Kenley
Places.
Apartments is apartments, and
Right.
Woodbridge is an HOA condo.
but if you drive by them, you look at them, and
And they kind of look like apartments.
Yeah.
And there are some that are rented, but there's an HOA there.
You know, my concern are these townhouse-style developments that are all rented.
Not built that way.
I know they're not built that way.
Right. They weren't
but,
built to be
a good
like
example is, you know, when, with the ones out near Pangbourne, you know, I think McCleary developed one, and somebody else developed one behind that, you know, and it's like, oh, you know, they were billed as, you know, we're gonna build these, they're gonna be sold, you know, and increase your owner occupied, and that.
well,
He sold
I
it in
think
shell
he's talking
development.
about the ones down by the lake.
He did the one on the Pangbourne parking lot.
Shale did. That was Shale.
Okay.
That was
Because
Shale.
McCleary originally started that development. All right.
Yeah, there was some social media alleging that somebody else other than Shale did it. That was Shale.
Okay. Yeah, McCleary had it first.
But so a lot of them are rentals, but they're still single-family rentals, single-family
Right,
homes.
right,
They're
and
not
they're
generating-
assessed individually.
They're not
Right, and
generating
that
more.
would not, that would be one that you could not, again, you could not break down further.
Right, and I don't
So
think there'd be a reason to.
If you pick townhouse, then it would be everything that's
I
a
know.
townhouse that's
I
not
like
an
the
R.
idea that the M class is 4 or more units, because I was under the impression, last meeting that we couldn't differentiate 4 or more, but that's all 4 or more. Am I-
Yes, that is a separate class
Yeah.
according to SDAP,
So
yes.
that's good. My take on this, or my position, is that, you know, I see the justification in a tiered property tax rate based on a unit that has multiple families or multiple residents in it that are going to require more services, or potentially more services from the police department, the fire department, more trash, that's where I can justify going there.
Right.
And if it's a single family, a rented house, it doesn't matter if it's my house that I own or the guy next door to me that is renting a house, we generate the same amount of traffic for the police department, fire department.
So technically, we're just not, I guess, technically, we don't have the ability to break that down further then. right now, where we're sitting this year.
You don't have the ability to break the R class down further than that.
Or the
No.
TH, or the
We can only
U.
go
Well,
owner,
TH is one.
No, TH
No,
is both.
TH
You
is
have people that
both.
live in their own townhouse, and then you have people that
What I'm
rent.
saying is they're still single units.
Right.
It's
Oh,
single units.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
yeah.
So-
they're built as single units, yes.
Right.
Whether they're rented, whether they're
And they're
built to be
assessed
rented or not
individually.
is a different
And they're
story.
assessed individually?
They are assessed individually, correct.
Correct.
So
So if
they're
you have, if you have a
homeowners,
string
fall
of
off the
5
side, even though they're
townhomes,
Yeah?
Not all be the
you
same
got
assessed.
5 parcels.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll find that,
I'm confused, because the one that, and I know this doesn't even apply, but the Housing Authority's building, the one out there, McCleary Hill, or whatever it's called, those are going to be townhouses. I mean, that's what they're being zoned sold as, is meeting the classification of a townhouse. But those aren't gonna be subdivided.
I don't know. I don't know about that. All I can tell you is that for like the ones you mentioned, you know, Papa Court.
They're all actually
those
subdivided
are
lots.
Those are subdivided lots.
So I'm
But the
looking-
housing authority is gonna own the whole slew. The housing authority is not going to sell those individually, so
Right, they're
why
not gonna
would?
subdivide.
Why would they subdivide them?
That's why I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out, I'm looking back there, Kathy, to confirm that all of our townhouses in this city are subdivided lots, are individually subdivided.
The only place where we have bulk lots of like duplexes and townhouses is housing authority property.
Yeah,
All of the other townhouses are subdivided.
right.
Okay, there you go, answer that question.
So looking at the numbers, this number that we have to get to or figure out a way to cut things, 776, right? So if you do the M class, a 12% increase, which is 11-cent tax rate increase, that still means we have to raise taxes for everything else 2 cents. So we would be doing just looking
Yeah,
at
you
those
could,
numbers.
right, you could,
Right?
you
So
could do
is that
something.
even worth doing, a 2-cent tax increase for everyone and 11 cents for apartments? I mean, that's,
Well, you could go higher, you could go to one of the higher, rates. I think he did a 20%, and it's not on that particular chart, but there was 20%, there was 25%.
Well, you could find 500,000 cuts.
Oh, yes.
Or we can.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Hey,
yeah.
I'm,
2 cents.
Right now, we're just trying to get your feel
Right, that was kind
for,
of my point.
For tiered
resident-
tax.
for tiered tax and,
Tiered taxes.
you mean raise taxes on everyone 3 pennies?
Well, I'm okay with, if I were going to do the tiered tax, and I think we're all pretty much agreeing that it would be M only, and I think if we were gonna do it, I would be looking at the 12% increase, and it would be basically 2 cents, for residential, and, whatever that figure comes out to for the 2 tiered.
11 cents.
Yeah, that's pretty high. I know, I wasn't
That-
talking about you.
No, but if that's 11 cents, that
12%?
can you run
that
that,
doesn't
Scott?
sound
That's
right
what
to
I'm
me.
trying, that's what I'm trying to do, let's see.
If you
Is
did
that
two,
maybe-
if you
maybe
did
I'm
2
reading-
cents across the board on all categories, and then, yeah, the 1.052 on just the M's.
Maybe I can't do that.
Yeah, it can't be an 11-cent tax
Yeah.
increase, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not,
Well, 11 cents on the average of
Well, if it's point
12 to
nine
15
four one,
bucks.
yeah.
12 to 15 bucks.
it is 11 cents?
No, I'm not, I'm sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry, don't pay attention to me right now.
0.9%.
Scott, they're referring to the initial chart in the
Yeah,
budget
I'm
book.
looking-
So
I'm
at
just looking at-
1.052 over the current tax rate, so that is 11 cents.
It's 11, yeah.
I agree with you.
I'm bad at math, but I.
No.
Well, I am bad at math,
Let me put it.
and I'm bad at
can't all
math,
be
and
bad at
that's down. With 11 cents,
And it
I'd
should
have an
give
issue
us
with
this.
that.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
that to compare
I agree
2
with you.
cents and 11 cents, or just do 3 cents overall, or just find $500,000 and cut.
Well,
I just don't, I don't understand that logic.
That's-
It gets back to that question that you're applying then that 3 cents to those properties which are single unit that then absorb that additional amount.
The amount of services that you're saying, that they're,
The amount of service-oriented cost, that's right.
so I understand what
You
you're
know,
saying.
and I'll use, you know, the houses that former Councilmember Quarterman would talk about. You know, I think you brought up the one house that, you know, had the 20% increase in assessment, you know, in a single triennial assessment or whatever, in terms of valuation. I realize there's a cap on it. And, you know, that house then, is absorbing that additional, amount that all of those other properties that then are getting those decreases isn't. And, I don't use, the property, good example, 1017 Oak Hill. That's a property that's for sale right now. You know, it's a larger home. It's not been occupied for, 2-3 years now. And I believe that the annual taxes on that property is somewhere in the neighborhood of like $4,500. So that penny on that property is much larger in scale, in actual dollar scale, than that other property that you're looking at that, 11 cents on. No different than, and you could pick, any number of homes, in that area where simply because it's, I'm just gonna be real frank here, simply because it's a larger home in the north end means that it gets to absorb the, what I'll call a disproportionate share of that 3 pennies that we're sitting here talking about than 80% of the rest of the properties, in the city, that fall into those residential categories, right?
Actually, I'm not even gonna say yes or no, because it will still come back to assess value
That's
and
right.
and if and when it ever sells. We have heard stories in those situations from residents who live in the north end, and some of the areas in the north end on the residential side have increased. So,
And as long as those
If we-
keeps increasing, then they keep absorbing that additional amount that everybody else who's decreasing gets to ride on. That's as simple as it is.
so it's all about averages. So on average, some are gonna pay less, some are gonna pay the exact same, and some are gonna pay more. It all depends on where your assessed values fall. And right now, because we're in year 2 of our triennial assessment period, most people will not see a new assessment this year. Again, if this ever sells and the new property owners come in, they very well could. I did include, and I will give kudos to my staff, because they worked really hard in a day and a half to get this done so I can include it. But in the packet that was included tonight, we came back and tried to look at, okay, let's look at a range of home values. And we started with $75,000 and went up in increments to $200,000. And we said, okay, so there's our home values. Typically, on average, median value of homes in Hagerstown are, some say 125, some say 150. For our instance, we're gonna use the $150,000 value. So if your home is valued at $150,000, if there were an actual overall 3-cent tax rate increase, that is a change of $45
Right.
more that you pay in a year,
the
again,
3
on
pennies.
average. And so if you look at the chart right below, that chart shows you the breakdown of where that additional $45 goes. So again, what I asked my staff to do, and I'll give shout outs because Jennifer's sitting back here as my newest staff person, but $75,000, so we looked at the lowest home value, $75,000, the highest home value of $200,000, and the median, which was $150,000. You're gonna notice in each of those charts, those are kind of the home value scenarios we gave. So if there was a 3-cent overall tax rate increase in your house for $150,000 value, so that's looking at right here. So overall, that's an increase of $45 additional a year. If you look at the blue line, that by far is where the biggest majority of your money is going to go, $24.36, and the blue code, if you come over to the far right, shows that that's public
And-
safety. $24.36.
just to go back, I wanna take a step back, because this, I think, clarifies my point, is when you're talking about, homes in that category, in that particular location, that are the only percentage of homes really, by a majority in the city, that are seeing increases in assessed, values through the state assessment valuation process, you know, they're above that 200 figure, right? I mean, they're,
Probably, yeah, I would
By
say
address.
certainly a fair share.
So-
Outliers, they would
so,
be outliers.
so let's
Yeah.
apply,
Far outliers.
let's just say it's 300. So you end up at 90 for the one, right? And you go down to the lower part of the scale, even if you're at the 125, you're at about $50. So one sees 90, one sees $50. One gets to absorb twice as much, impact in increase, right? Even though, in most of those cases, those are single-family, single-unit homes.
Owner
Whereas-
occupied.
That's right, largely owner occupied, whereas you go right down the street here to property down the street has 6 units and one commercial in it, right? 7 units valued at $136,000, it's gonna see $50. But the home out there is gonna see, $90. And I look at that, and I know we sit here and talk about, is 11 cents right, is something right, but if you do it across the board, that's gonna keep happening across the board,
Well,
year
you
after
gotta
year.
remember, even if you do 11 cents on 4 more units, and we'll take the lower of the scale, we'll take 4 units. That means 2.7 cents per unit is what the increase actually is. It's not 11 cents per unit, it's 2.7.
No, it's per parcel. If we're back to tiered tax.
As opposed to would you be
I
at,
just think it.
right, right.
We sit
2.7
here,
per unit.
we sit here and talk about perception. We talk about the perception that our staff isn't friendly and that we need to change that perception. We say we have a perception that our downtown is unsafe, and it's not, but we need to change that perception. And now we're saying we have a perception we're a bad place to do business in, and the way we change that perception is by having an 11-cent tax increase. I agree with the 2-tier. I have no problem with that. But I think the way you do that is you start off very gently. I think an 11-cent tax increase that saves everybody else a penny, again, the squeeze is not worth the juice. I mean, you can tell all day long, I understand what you're saying, Christian, and I understand what you're saying, Bob. But if I own the property, I'm not hearing that I got a 2.7 cent tax increase on 4 units. And especially, I've said it before, when the renters have said, oh my God, look what they're telling us you're gonna do. How many times have I said, hey, the renters don't have to worry, they got leases. They got leases, their leases aren't gonna allow the landowner to willy-nilly up the rent. They have a written lease that says how much their rent will be. So the reality is, who will at least be eating this on the initial rental terms are gonna be the landowners. So, you can say how it's being spread out, but those tenants aren't going to be paying for it until their leases are up and new leases are entered into. And again, you can see the newspaper story. Council debates 11-cent tax increase on multi-units and.
Which on average is about $150 a year. Divided by a minimum of 4 units in that category is about $40. And so, on average, that's what, about $3.50 a month? Or you go out and you place it upon these other properties and you continue that dynamic and.
How was my math?
And you make them less, you make them increasingly and continually less competitively marketable to sell and ensure that they remain in home ownership. And that's a reality that's happened.
So I understand that at a $200,000 value, a 3-cent increase is $60 a year,
A year.
right? how do you get to an 11-cent tax increase being $150 a year?
So that's a tiered tax rate. What this is showing, what my chart is showing, kind of speaks to the question that.
I'm at
that
11 times
Councilmember
12 bucks.
Alshire rose last week. So what these
On average,
charts
11 times
below
12 bucks.
include are specifically, don't have anything to do with the tiered tax. Instead, it comes back and speaks to our residents who are interested in what does,
Where does
instead
my
of
tax money
percentage
go?
and a penny and two pennies, what does that look like to me? So if this is my home value, and if, and I'm not saying that anybody is recommending, but if tax rates were increased 3 cents, 2 cents, or 1 cent, what does that look like annually? And then the charts
I
below.
totally understand. So what I'm asking is what would an 11-cent tax increase look for a $200,000 home annually? Because that's what we're talking about.
No,
What am I
11 cents,
missing?
11 cents is for the apartment.
I understand that. So say the apartment is valued at $200,000.
Okay.
What does an 11-cent tax increase amount to?
Well, what's 60 times 4 would be 12 cents.
It's $220.
Yeah, 200.
I was using a figure of $135,000 to be times,
Minimum
times
4 units.
12 bucks times 11 is what I was using,
You're
and 12
using-
bucks is about $135,000 value. Yeah, it goes up as the valuation goes up.
You know, and I can
That,
go,
that's true.
I'm sorry, I can go a little bit worst case scenario, that a 15% tax increase on
Tier
a,
tax,
on
tier
a,
tax.
That's
on
understandable.
apartment, on the M class, that has an assessment of $144,700, 4 units, at 15% is $4.19 per unit.
For the year,
For the-
right? 4 times 4 times 12, right?
So how much per unit?
They'd see a $4.19 per
Per
month,
unit.
Per month.
per
Per
unit.
unit.
And all I'm saying is,
On what assessed value?
144 something, 144,000.
144,000.
something.
So essentially, a little bit more per unit than single-family residents pay.
Right.
Per unit,
Per unit.
per
that's
unit.
right. That's a profitable
But
entity.
as you were saying, that's, they have leases, so that's,
Right.
that's going to be eaten by the,
That
Usually a year
ultimate,
lease.
right, and if it is eaten by the tenants, what I'm saying is you're increasing the tenant's tax rate per unit more than you're increasing the homeowner's tax unit. And if the idea is that each unit is creating as much work as a single family is, then what I say is those single individual units, to the degree it's conceivable, shouldn't end up getting a bigger tax increase than a single-family resident, because then we're going to a regressive tax system, where in reality, we're raising the taxes highest on the people who are least able to afford it, renters, because that's what we're saying. We're saying here, that renter per unit is going to get a larger yearly tax increase than a single-family resident, and I don't see that being proper.
We'll make it net. I mean, you can get to net, 8 cents, pick a figure, you're gonna get to net, but you've been backwards, we've been backwards, this city's been backwards on
For
that
so
process.
long, right.
I agree,
Forever.
and what I'm saying, the answer to years of not doing it right is not to jump in head first with an
That's a
11-cent
big
tax
number.
increase.
I mean, I get it, at the end of the day, and I'm
Not
sitting here
11,
staring
it's
at Dave,
2.7.
because at the end of the day, all we talked about here is percents and cents and numbers, and we're really talking about, on average, about $50 a property. That's the bottom line, we're talking about $50 a property, and whether we're gonna take about 15 to 20 bucks of that amount per property and apply it to one classification or the other. And every year, what we do when we put it across the board is we apply it to one classification over another. And that classification picks up that loss year after year, to the benefit of the properties that don't have to pick that up. That's what happens.
You're correct.
And so at some point, we're gonna have to say, is that what we're gonna keep doing? Or are we going to stop doing that? Because like it or not, owner occupancy is becoming less competitively marketable by doing that very thing that drives folks away from wanting to buy those very homes that we keep increasing the taxes on. And that's lunacy to me.
And we can't continue to have owner-occupied residential units subsidize non-owner occupied residential units, which is what we do. And if you use the 11 cents, and if 4 units is 2.7, what is 8? If you have 8 units and an 11-cent increase, now you're at 1.375. I mean, it's all numbers. That's all it is.
But it comes back to, but again, that's gonna come back to averages, because we're gonna apply
Sure.
a consistent amount across all of apartments, and each apartment is going to be different number of units. So
Sure.
the apartment buildings with the smaller number of units is gonna pick up, I understand what,
Well, again, but that all depends upon assessed value.
Correct.
You have-
Exactly.
You have 4-unit apartments that are assessed, in some cases, much higher than 8-unit apartments. So it's all assessed value. Units can really, units are held hostage at the assessed value of what they're a part of. So just because it's 4 units doesn't mean that assessed value is always going to be lower than an 8-unit apartment. And in fact, in this case, especially in certain parcel areas of the city, it would be exactly the opposite.
but again, it's all
But
about
it's
averages.
an average, but then it becomes an average.
So, I have a suggestion. The $776,000 that we need to come up with is like the worst case scenarios. Right now, that's what we
Right
need.
now.
So shouldn't we try to get that number as close to 0 as possible and then find out how we're gonna do this?
And I'm looking at the folks that want to reduce that 3 cents right now, and here's why I'm not there. And I get it. Every year we look at this book, and I'm not as far as Lou yet, but I'm gonna say this, we're talking about $45 a house. I mean, that's about the number, about $45 a property, right? And there are two things that drive this budget: capital, and wages and benefits. And if you're not looking if you're not looking to meet the obligations that you've set out for your wages and benefits that you've agreed to, then you've got room to find a reduction.
Right, I
If you want to
understand that.
defer capital maintenance, then you have room for reduction. Beyond those two measures, I don't think that there is anything measurable in this budget where you're gonna find $775,000. I'm all for listening to
I
that.
understand that, but shouldn't we do our due diligence to
Well, but when,
go over
Oh, yeah.
everything first? I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean,
I know we're not gonna find $776,000, or they would have done it, I understand that. But I feel like it's still our job to try to,
well, I think that's the job of going through the budget book. I've never been the budget hawk that my fellow council members are because of my faith in staff. And when you look at this, it becomes very simple
plain
of
as
where you can make some decisions of what you're gonna get rid of. But the blue line, the whatever next line that is at 850, and the green line, they sure aren't gonna get cut. And we all have the same argument. The argument over 11 cents amounts to just this amount. The flip side is 3 cents is $45 a year. I mean, what is unreasonable, and especially when you look at that one chart that Michelle says,
25-year history.
I like to look at, the 25-year history. A 3 cent tax increase, as I said to Michelle at the table today, how did you do that? Only 3 cents. I remember interviewing Austin. I forget what the figure Austin thought we were gonna have to raise taxes just to keep her head above water. And I think if staff has been able to come back and say, we can continue providing all the services we're providing right now for the 3 cent tax increase, I think that's amazingly reasonable. I don't remember a budget year where staff came in with an increase really of less than that in a long time. I mean, they've come in higher and we've pared it down, staff has really worked. But, I don't disagree with you, Emily, that if we can find it, I just, personally don't know where it is. Every time I look at this stuff, I think where we can spend more money, not less. And I don't mean to be sarcastic, it's like, geez, we could use more cameras, the crime control cameras. We could use more of this, we could use more of that, and what's happening is we're not getting more of anything. We're staying the same, and when you look at that 25-year history, it's basically driven by what we've been told as an elected body for the last 25 years. It's driven by wages and salaries. And that's why everything is going up so much, is because that's what happens, and capital budgets.
Capital, yeah, those are the two things. And the capital budget, the reason why we try to put some monies into PAYGO this year, more in that increase over last year, is because we deferred so much. We've been deferring so much,
Right.
and we just can't keep doing that.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not
have the
interested
other
in
thing
deferring
is-
capital meeting, I'm
I
just
know.
not.
And in fiscal year 18, just so that for the new people, we did something outside my comfort zone, and I
And
said it at the
mine,
time.
and
We
mine.
utilized $1 million in fund balance reserve
Right.
to invest in our infrastructure. And so while we did that, and you may have some fund balance reserve utilization included in fiscal year 19 budget and what's proposed, it is not above and beyond that original $1,049,000.
Yeah.
And that's because in looking at everything else, and I can take you to a page and show you, but we implemented a policy and we're trying our best to be fiscally responsible and sustainable. And so we can't continue to say, we're not, because if you look at fiscal year 18 budget, literally PAYGO money for capital projects wasn't even $200,000. We're talking not even a penny to invest in the infrastructure for our citizens.
Which I go back to the fact that if
Crazy.
wages and benefits, and more specifically, public safety is not on the table for consideration to find savings, and for me, deferred capital maintenance is not on the table, and I just don't know you can get three people that it is, I don't know where you find that.
You're not going to find
Well,
it,
not only that-
because we have been looking for 3 months, and there is nothing else in your operational line items, in your,
Yeah, I'm all for people like,
Materials
putting a
and
list
supply,
together and
right.
bringing the list in and saying,
Yeah,
here's
that's
the
what we've
list
done
of
in the
stuff.
past, make a list of what you
No.
think should be cut.
But
But the other thing is, we are at the cusp right now of, unless somebody's gonna tell me different, if it all works out, probably the largest multi-governmental and private industry project of a generation with the urban improvement project. And again, it's just me, when we talk about how easy it is to talk about 11-cent tax increase on apartments, when we look at the capital things we have going, it's like, yeah, if it were up to me, I'd find some more money for urban improvement project. But we're not going to find that for that, and we're doing what we can do. I think if it were up to me, I would do a 3-cent tax increase and a 5-cent tax increase on the M-Class to start the concept and get people familiar with the fact, listen, we have coming up within this administration, hopefully within this administration, we're gonna also have a stormwater fee coming up, right? That's gonna be coming up hopefully before we're done. And I just think that the way to introduce this multi-tier tax system is by not having something that people are gonna go, oh my God, with. But we do 3 cents and we do 5 cents on the tier. And we generate a little bit more money than we even are proposing right now, and give us all a minor bit of discretionary spending. And we introduced the 2-tier tax system. We don't do what I understand is logical for people who want to look at figures and logic, which is really shift the burden where it needs to be faster. But I think you've got to introduce this at a reasonable rate, and I just think, I don't feel like having our whole night spent at budget hearings with this place packed with people telling us what we're nuts with an 11-cent tax increase. And I think 3 cents and 5 cents is very reasonable, and it actually generates more money than we have right now, instead of cutting.
It's definitely gonna do that.
But it would give you some cushion
It would. and
on
it's-
the ability and on our projection of our 1%, and it would give us some, a little bit of room for the reassessments or anything if that does come out, so.
And now I will speak as a politician who has no intention of running again. Folks, if you're gonna raise taxes, do it now, because you're not gonna do it in 2019. I don't know of any election year tax increase that's ever been done in the city.
2009.
Was it in 2009? But that's about it. I mean, well, it's just a fact of life, you know, it's a simple fact of life. It doesn't generally happen in an election year.
You know, when you say that, 3 cents and then 5 cents, you know, that, so, I mean, are you talking about increasing the M category by 8 cents then?
No, I'm talking about increasing 5 cents on M category and 3 cents on,
And take that,
on-
because 3 cents doesn't, I mean, the thing about a penny on a tax rate is 200 and,
Right.
how much?
$58,000.
$58,000, then, but that includes currently what we tax everything at.
Correct.
Right, so, you know, you're gonna raise about roughly the same amount of money when it's all
Yeah,
said.
it
A little bit
About
more.
50 grand more.
About 50
Yeah,
grand
it should
more.
be pretty close.
56,
It's a gentle introduction.
And we've all sat here in July and August, right after we passed the budget, with very, very reasonable folks coming in, whether it's the Miller House or the Discovery Station or the museum, with emergency things that need to be done, and we all go, geez, it'd be nice to be able to find the money to do it.
Well,
And
you
this
know, I
would
mean,
give us the ability
and
to
I
do
have
it.
some questions, and I will email those questions out then, and make that a little bit less hateful for people, so. But I have some questions, so.
You can ask a question.
No, well, right now, I can tell you the one person I have a question for is not here,
Oh, okay.
so that doesn't work. So,
I like that proposal, Lou.
3%
honestly.
across the board, additional 2 cents on plastic.
But I don't know,
And then that buys you about $832,000 additional revenue.
I think it should be up to.
Well, about 50,000 more
50
than
more than what's,
then the 776.
yes,
than what's included in your budget.
unofficial, unaudited.
So 826.
So the only thing that would make it fair is the 11-cent increase?
No, I don't think it's 11. You get me a 2 and 8, somewhere close to those numbers. But other than that, I just, all you're doing is.
You vote against it, get someone else to, and then I'll veto it, then we'll find out where we're at.
Like, I just, 2.5 and 7, something that shows me that there's some level of compromise.
Yeah. I mean, we can see all the different numbers.
I think, again, you're asking me as a homeowner, and you 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 as a homeowner, to subsidize rental properties. That's what we're doing.
We're already doing it.
Well, we've been
Yeah,
doing it
and we're
for-
continuing to do it.
You gotta, again, there's a method to do things, and, to suddenly go that for the entire history of this community, we've not done it right, to say, well, we're gonna fix it this way, I just don't think that's the right
Plus,
fix.
if you can.
And I understand what you're saying,
get
Christian,
2.5
you
and 7,
don't,
something
you don't
that-
hear
that
me
shows
arguing with you about
more of
that.
a net
Yeah.
neutral.
Yeah,
Gen-
I'm sure
a gentle
we can
introduction to
find,
it.
And
we can find a way.
I think that at least says, we recognize that there's an issue, homeowners, we hear you, and we're working to address that inequity.
Okay, so let's move on then.
Okay, well, staff will go back and run a few more scenarios then
Yep.
and have those.
By the way, I love this, great
We,
job.
we,
This is
we have
fabulous.
we have
Yeah, you're doing
a
great.
super scientific sheet here that we can plug any number you want with any class you want and tell you within seconds
Super
what
scientific
it's gonna do.
sheet.
We can
Well,
all
I
just
think
Because I came up
submit
with-
our
I think you
different
already-
Scott's running a
scenarios.
You see
spreadsheet,
the
that's all
range
I
we're
said,
in right now.
okay?
Yeah,
Anywhere from.
I mean, yeah, I mean, right now
Eight to five.
with, yeah, I mean, we can give you.
So you
whatever
did the 97.2 and the 99.
97.2, we did the 97.2 and the 99.2 for the apartment.
All right.
And
I
that's
mean, we
about 50
can-
grand more.
That's about 50 grand more.
But we can look at doing an overall 2%, and then what difference is needed on the apartments to make the offset.
It's about 9. That's why I said you get close.
And then when we come back next week, one of the first things we'll do is go ahead and look at the general fund and look a little bit at some of these charts where you can start to see the categories specifically in section 1, pages 26, 27, and 28, so that you can really see the only increases in the fiscal year 19 budget on the expense side are in salary, wages, and benefits, and contractual services. And what I will say with contractual services is we've got to keep in mind a big share of the increase over 19 to 18 budget and contractual services has to do with the enhanced services in what we have changed in our trash and recycling. So again, we're already contractually bound. And then the last and final thing is in our capital infrastructure items. And those are the 3 largest categories. There's other areas where we have decreased. And then when we started this budget cycle, one of the things that we ask all of our department managers to do, in years past, we've said, don't request anything above and beyond what you've done in a prior budget year. This year, what we said was, don't even request what you did in the prior budget cycle, but look at where you ended the year in fiscal year 17. Keep it at that level unless you can seriously justify other. And it's one of the reasons why everything is lower except for those 3 categories.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
You're off a 10.
I'm losing it by the second.
All right, next up is the Fifth Amendment to the lease at Municipal Stadium. Travis Painter, welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Travis Painter, the general manager of the Suns, is with me, and currently the Suns have a lease through this calendar year, this season. In fact, opening pitch is Thursday night, right?
Coming quick,
70 degrees at game time.
Yep.
80 on Friday.
The Suns have given us a request to extend the lease pretty much as it is right now, the same terms that it is right now. In your packet, it says 2 more years, which would be the 2019-2020 season. Over the weekend, they requested that we would consider adding a 3rd year, which would be the 2021 season. Everything would remain the same, except we added a termination fee of $100,000, which is acceptable to the owner of the Suns, and that would be if they would break the lease, then that would be the penalty they would pay. So I guess the question really comes down to 2 or 3 year lease, and the terms would be the same. Rent would stay the same at $35,000, which we roll back into the stadium. And then we come back to you each October with a suggested list of things that we would recommend that we put that $35,000 towards.
We're currently under this is the end of a 3-year lease right now, coming up this season.
I only have one question. On the early termination clause, I just want to make sure, and I think it probably is effective this way, but just would like to make sure, team is sold, new owner takes over, they've subletted the lease under the provision here, which I'm assuming would be done. That's the way they would come in, by subletting?
There'd be a transfer agreement to the new, you would have to approve a transfer agreement.
Okay, well, that would be under the assignment and subletting.
Yes.
Okay, right, where it says notwithstanding anything else, if upon 10 days written notice of its minor league baseball team, provided sale team has been approved in advance by lessee's major league affiliate, okay? And I have no problem with that. I mean, we don't have to have the right to veto somebody who wants to sell the team. But what I want to make sure of, my interpretation of this is they would take it subject to this lease. I guess they could renegotiate a new lease with us if they wanted to, But I'm just wanna make sure that whoever comes in knowing there's $100,000 early termination clause.
Yeah, that would be,
That's all I wanna make sure.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, when the current owner bought the team, there was an assignment document that the mayor and council approved. I guess they could ask for an amendment to the lease at that point,
They
but,
certainly asked for it,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
as far as I understand it, this, if you pass this, this is what would be standing.
Anybody else? Any questions?
I don't have any questions. I'm gonna vote no on this when it comes before us. I'm opposed to 3 years. I'm increasingly opposed to taking the 35 grand and putting it into the stadium. And I don't see the necessity for the early termination clause.
Okay, anybody else?
I'm okay with it.
Isn't that the way it's always been, that the 35,000 fee?
It just changed 3 years ago, actually.
Right.
yeah.
That was the last lease that was negotiated, was
Actually, we
the,
used to rent it for like $1.
they used to rent it for $1, right,
And now we upped it to 35 and we put it back into the
Roll
stadium.
back in.
right.
And the $35,000 will be discussed as to where we're going to.
Yes, be agreed
You
upon.
requested,
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's,
We
okay.
put a list
Staff
together,
have reviewed
and then
the
we bring it
request
and you
and-
guys
Yeah.
I see.
approve it.
Okay.
Keep in mind that the city does, I mean, for those out there in TV land who believe that the city doesn't make any money from the Hagerstown Suns lease, they do pay upwards of over $80,000 when it comes to utilities and A&A tax combined. So the city does benefit to the tune of about 84,000 actually a year.
The Suns are a staple to this community. So,
Okay, we're good to go?
So 3 years, and we'll pass a resolution later this month.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Community Legacy and Strategic Demolition Fund applications. That's the one I didn't read.
What does that have to do with the UIP?
Yeah.
Here to start the process for applying for this year's applications to the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development for Community Legacy and the Strategic Demolition Fund. Last year, we were awarded $900,000 through the Strategic Demolition Fund to help with the urban improvement project downtown. And strategic demolition, you may think, oh, that's just for demolition, but no, it's all pre-construction activities can be used in that program. So acquisition costs, architectural engineering costs, abatement of environmental issues, site prep, and demolition. So it's not as flexible as community legacy, because community legacy can be for anything, but because it is so specialized, it's not as competitive as community legacy. And so, we were advised that whatever we can do this year, we should try to make sure we spread it over, give the staff of the state as much flexibility as possible to figure out which way to push it, but we're being recommended to apply for $900,000 again. And so that's what we're proposing here, to spread it over both programs, the $900,000 for the urban improvement project, and then not specify in the applications which of the components would be getting what amount of those requested funds, so that by the time we're doing grant agreements in the fall, we'll know which projects are most in need, because other applications will have been awarded in that time frame. And I asked the state if that would be acceptable, and they said yes.
Great.
As a way to keep flexibility. And then the other proposal is to request $250,000 from Strategic Demolition Fund to help the Dome Museum, as this board has requested that staff facilitate that. And so it would be $120,000 for acquisition, and then the Dome folks have requested that we also put in $130,000 for architectural, because if it's a $1.3 million project, 10%. So that's a guesstimate of what they're gonna need for architectural services to move forward with adapting that building. And so if you are in favor of this proposal, then the next step is at the regular meeting this month to adopt the resolutions for Community Legacy and for the Strategic Demolition Fund.
I'm good.
Okay? Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Megan.
And last but not least, Neighborhood Services Code Amendments, follow-up. Part
So
two.
we wanted to make sure that we knew exactly what mayor and council are in support of with what we were talking about with the revisions to the rental licensing program. We feel we know where you are with the leaning for the donation bins and for the fees, although we'll talk about that again with the rental licensing fees, and then where you are in terms of the vegetation issues. But we're not exactly sure where everyone is with the proposals for the rental licensing program. So we're back to try to get that better understanding from staff, and I guess more certain consensus amongst the council on this issue before we start drafting up ordinances. And so we have a PowerPoint to help with this, just this specific rental licensing thing, helps you to see what's in the ordinance now and what's being proposed for change, and then also lays out some proposed ideas for revocation of the rental license program, as was requested that we look into that at the last meeting, and Paul has been doing a lot of research over the months about that kind of thing. So we've got something for you to consider there too. So,
All right, so the first item that we were proposing for changes to the rental facilities ordinance was the definitions, and the definitions included for a rental unit included adding dormitory, homeless shelter, and residential care facility. Not talking about a fee structure for these, we're just talking about adding the definition, including these into the rental facilities program. Then during our discussion from last week, Kathy worked and created a definition for a homeless shelter. And that basically is a facility for transient stays by homeless individuals and families. A homeless shelter can take various forms, including individual apartment units per family, dormitory format facilities with individual sleeping rooms per family, or individual with shared bathrooms, or a barracks format with multiple beds in a room for related and unrelated individuals with shared bathrooms. So just kind of looking, it may be a lengthy definition, but it is the types of shelters that we do have in our community, and it's addressing all of those ones in one definition.
and then when it comes down to figuring out a fee, you can determine if you want to do it differently depending on those types.
Which we do have on the next slide. And the other thing is just updating some definitions to accommodate the current department. It was underneath a previous department name. So then on the next slide, we have how the fee structure would be broken down. The ability to lien any license fees, we talked about that previously, and I think we had a relatively consensus upon that of leaning those such fees for unregistered properties, and then also the reinspection fees that they're associated when we go out and people are not ready for the inspection after we've already done the inspection and they've asked us to come out for their inspection and didn't make all the repairs. One thing that we did not talk about the last time, but as we've been doing the research, that our current license is we allow licenses to be transferred. There is no fee associated with that. Looking at other jurisdictions, as we request to do, and I keep on reading over and over that all the other jurisdictions are non-transferable licenses. Either they charge a license fee, transfer a license fee, or make new property owners reapply for a new license. So the one thing that we listed here was a $25 fee per license. And then if they don't report the transfer to us in a certain set period of time, some are 15 days, some are less than that, then they are charged a new application fee. This is basically because we don't know when the properties have sold. As you all basically kind of can attest to that, you don't know when a property is sold, nor does us as the government know those types of things. We need to be reported those things, as well as also when property managements have changed. We get a lot of letters back to our office with very unkind responses that we should be aware of everything. And I'm being very nice when I say unkind responses. So it's just making a requirement to report those transfers to us. And then we're looking at creating licensing fees for a dormitory, which would be $100 per structure plus $10 per unit.
Which is the same as a rooming house that's already in the ordinance.
And then we have a residential care facility, which would be a $75 per unit in a dwelling unit format. And then if it would be $100 for a residential care facility in a dormitory format plus $10 per unit. So again, similar to our rooming house. And then the homeless shelter, where I think we have some discussion, is it's $75 per unit for a homeless shelter in a dwelling unit format. It'd be $100 for a homeless shelter in a dormitory format plus $10 per unit. And then $100 for a homeless shelter in a barracks format plus whatever amount per bed, per unit, designation area, however we want to structure that. So that's, I think, where we had the biggest discussion the last time, and hoping to hear some ideas on where we land on this.
Why not just use the $10 per unit then?
For the barrack style,
Right,
So like in,
one barrack room is a unit,
we certainly
Good.
can.
you know what I'm saying? Then it eliminates us sitting here trying to figure out whether you're gonna count beds or not.
I definitely don't think we should count beds, but.
Yeah. The room is what you're inspecting. You know what I mean? So why not just keep it consistent with the rest of them?
That's fine.
yeah, we just weren't sure where you wanted to go with that, with the concerns that were expressed last time.
So have these, like the homeless shelter, for example, they're not inspected currently?
The one that we have that's in an apartment format is.
Okay, but the one, like Reach, like, just use them as an example. So I'd be interested to see, like, if you went to Reach tomorrow or the next day or something and looked around and had an idea of the impact it was gonna be. It would be interested if we go in and completely blindside them, these other entities that are nonprofits. Because who knows, if you haven't inspected them, what standards they're being held to now compared to our standards. I'm concerned about the impact that it's gonna have, or if there's any way that we, you could prepare them ahead of time.
Sure, on the requirement.
I mean, I certainly, just as a business, you know what I mean, looking at it from a business standpoint, I wouldn't want to be blindsided if the city of Hagerstown changed a rule and the next thing you guys come in and then I have a $10,000 bill that I had no idea I was gonna have to prepare for. So I think if we're gonna be inspecting places that have never been inspected before, perhaps before it passes or something, you could go meet with them to give them an idea of what they're looking at.
You're talking about
Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Do a courtesy inspection and say, this is
Yeah.
what we found, that it's gonna need to be mitigated.
Right, so they have a understand, because I just feel like I have no idea what they look like or what our standards are gonna be for that, and I would hate for them to get, I mean, what if it's $10,000-$20,000 and they have no idea that that's coming?
So let's say we go inspect. And let's say money issues aside, let's say we find 7 things. And those 7 things are of a nature that by our code, we would deliberate on and say, you know, at any other place, if any other person were occupying this space and lived there, we would apply that law to that place to address the safety component of it, you know, in this manner. But once we do that, and then we don't follow through in the same manner that we would at any other living space, then do we open ourselves up to that liability that we've identified that and said, well, I know we've identified that.
Because it's you.
Because it's you and because there's a cost, we're going to, you know, develop a different parameter of corrective action.
I think quality of life and dangerous
That's what I'm
situations
saying.
are different. I mean, but also, you can't it's a homeless shelter. I mean, it's a last resort for these people. The last thing I would like to see is us add more regulation and then it have a effect of there being more people in the street. I mean, we already have that problem. People aren't in a homeless shelter to live like they're staying at the Hilton. I mean, it's a last resort. So I just don't, and like I said, I don't know, they might be perfect when you go in there. I have no idea.
Well, just to kind of answer some of your questions, Kathy, myself, and other staff reached out to these organizations that run the homeless shelters and similar facilities, and we asked them what standards do they hold to, and were able to obtain some checklist that they do some sort of inspection from, based if it was a state or a local person that just did it based on some standard they would have to maintain. Some of the inspection standards that they do inspect for these types of places is cleanliness, lighting, fire egress, Do they have a bathrooms with their fixtures functioning properly? They have a kitchen with things functioning? Do they have a bed or a bedroom? Things that they do not look at are things such as like overcrowding, hot water heater safety, the dryer duct safety, smoke alarm requirements, CO requirements, proper ventilation, electrical hazards, exhaust safety, and water contamination. So those are things that are not part of the checklist.
A can of worms when you go in and inspect.
Oh,
Potentially, but as, again, we mentioned Reach as an example. Reach was a brand-new renovation in 2008, and unless they're not maintaining their property to a pretty decent standard, which I've been in the building a number of times, it's going to be up to pretty current code standards.
But when you talk about, when you say that, we know the code has changed in the last 10 years. And you go back now and look, something that passed code back in 2008 doesn't adhere to code today.
That's not true, because we have not changed the property maintenance code since before 2008. So it should meet that minimum code standard.
So if you go up to Reach and you see they have a microwave that's not vented outside, does that pass?
Depends on what, at that time, the building was built. If that was allowed per the construction.
It would have been in 2008.
Then we would allow it.
Okay.
Because we do not require exterior ventilation for rental units of a microwave right now as well. It's not required. It's only if it's a new requirement that they have to meet the ventilation.
Well, let's say, excuse me, let's say you've got a, you know, I don't know, and I'm gonna be real dumb here and say, let's say you inspect and you see, you know, beds or a bed, you know, against the wall, you know, but there's a heating unit, you know, underneath or directly adjacent to it. I don't know what the standard is. I'm just guessing, you know, you're not supposed to put a bed right next to a radiator or, you know, that doesn't have the protective shield on it. And I think it gets to your point where you say, hey, that bed needs to be moved, not, you know, hey, you're in violation, here's a fine. I think our goal is to say, if you're going to apply this, you say, hey, you know, here are the couple of items, you know, and let's just say one of them is a bed location issue. Or let's say there's 6 beds in a particular location, and for crowding purposes, that you would apply to any other property, you say it should be 5 beds, you know, in this particular location. You know, that's the maximum for this size room. That, to me, is one of those minimum standards. I find it hard that you say we're going to apply a certain set of standards to different living types, and especially a lesser level of standard to individuals within living situations that you know, are of the most vulnerable nature. That to me doesn't compute, so.
May I suggest that instead of wondering what it all would result in, that we just ask staff to go up and take a look at the Reach shelter and tell us, you know, what it would be? Because I agree with Emily that, first of all, I don't find these people are the most vulnerable people. I find the people that are living out in the Garden Plaza Hotel with children are the most vulnerable people. As I understand it, we're dealing with all adults, and at least at Reach. And-
Salvation Army is also children.
Right, but I would suggest we take a look at the Reach shelter and see what impact it would have. I know that's what Emily's concern is, what would the impact be?
And not just Reach, though.
I was gonna say, there's a number of shelters.
Yeah,
Right.
not just Reach.
Yeah, as Paul was saying, Reach went into a brand-new renovation. It's probably where you might wonder what the result would be at the Salvation Shelter in an old building, or at the Rescue Mission in an old
I think we
building.
should look at them, you know, and find out. There are things that when you say, I think we can all go, well, wait, yeah, they need to have smoke detectors. Yeah, they need to have carbon monoxide detectors. As a matter of fact, I can't imagine with it being a state law that you have to have a smoke detector in your home, that you don't have the same law for a homeless shelter. But I think we don't know. We're sitting here wondering what it is. So why don't we find out?
I'm just saying that I'm fine with that. But once we do find out, we can't then apply a different set of standards that puts us in a situation of liability to say, oh, we knew, now something happened, and we knew, but we
It all
directed
depends which
staff to
standards,
apply different.
all
levels of
depends
standards.
which standards we're looking at. Listen, I'm not nearly as concerned if the Reed shelter, going back to the old days, doesn't have a strainer in the sink. Okay, we remember those days. So I think we need to find out what we're talking about, that's all.
And do other municipalities, like surrounding us, are there homeless shelters in this type of licensing fee structure?
I did not find them delineated out to the level that we're looking at.
I mean, I'd be curious to, I'm always
But
not
Frederick
trying to
have a
compare.
24-hour shelter, and they have
Oh.
an inspection process through,
They do not have a licensing program in Frederick, so
they
there's,
don't.
there's,
Okay.
so there's no way to compare
Okay,
them.
all right.
You could also not include homeless shelters at this time and move forward with your dormitory and residential care facilities, and you can always amend an
Yeah, we
ordinance
always
later if you're ready to do
I completely disagree with that.
some of that.
I just do.
other things. So that would be up to you as well.
I just don't think you can, I understand what you were saying, but I don't think you can hold a homeless shelter that is run predominantly by volunteers in most situations and nonprofits to a single-family home. I mean, I'd highly
not.
doubt, as far as
But-
the standards, safety, smoke detectors, that stuff is
If you go
understandable.
down here to the ones that CAC bought, right? And you apply a set of standards, and you say to yourself, you're applying it to one entity now, but not others, that are apartment style, right? And you say, we're gonna apply it to this entity that's operating in this manner, that is just as nonprofit as the other one, that happens to do it under one set of circumstances, and you say, you know what, the occupancy level is, as it applies to these standards in this particular place, is, I don't know, let's just pick a number, 6 beds, per bedroom, whatever, or one person per every 60 feet, 60 square feet, I don't know, whatever the number. And then you go to another place and you say, you know what, there's no standard, you can cram 300 people in here, we don't have a standard. And then they get to operate in that manner outside of those parameters you've established, that you're placing upon other entities that operate the exact same type of service. I just don't know how you can look at one and say, the minimum safety standards as it applies to what you're doing for your operation is this, and you who are doing the same type of operation, there aren't those standards. I don't know how you do that.
Well, you're either gonna require them to be subject to the same standards that everyone else is, or not. I don't think it's if we do go this way, I agree with Emily. I think we have a duty to go in and do a pre-evaluation and kind of let them know, here's what we're seeing. You've got all lead paint in every window in the place, and that's not part of our standard. You've got no smoke detectors, and let them know what they're facing before we do this to them. But we still need to, whether it's a homeless shelter or not, we have a duty to make sure that people are safeguarded. So we can't not do it. We can't say, oh, because you're homeless, your life doesn't matter as much as the guy that's paying rent.
No, but there are two different standards, I would say. Again, I bring up the point that I wasn't being facetious when I said that one of the write-ups on rental registration was lack of having a screen in the sink, having a sieve in the sink. I'm not concerned about that at homeless shelter. And a homeless shelter is not a rental unit. There are not people who are living there. There are people who are spending short periods of time that don't even involve an entire day there. When we talk about overcrowding, I have yet to find any place on earth in the United States that isn't subject to fire marshal's rules, anywhere. And if somebody's gonna tell me that the fire marshal doesn't care about how many people they put in the homeless shelters, I'd be shocked. So I think the distinction between the two, there is a huge distinction between a rental unit and a and a homeless shelter that doesn't even operate all year and doesn't operate all day. And I agree with you, Austin, and I agree with Kristen, that we need to make sure that there is basic safety in those places. And the two prime examples that are real easy to come up with are carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. I'd be shocked if they weren't in these places. But then again, I'd be shocked to find out that buildings get condemned and landlords take the condemned sign off and go and rent them again. So, but that's my only point that I agree with Emily. One, I think it is a totally different class and should not be subject to the same rules as living places.
So what's the one that it is applied to right now?
St. John's Shelter.
Is that open all year?
I mean, it's apartment,
16
people actually
apartment
live
building.
there, right?
But not Salvation Army?
But not Salvation Army. Some of the Salvation Army properties are in the system, but they're more single-family home type setups. The barrack-style setup that they have in their main building is not.
So St. John's is more permanent, and then the Salvation Army and Reach are more transient, very short-term
And St. John's,
stays.
yeah, St. John's is not permanent, it's just that they offer a pre-furnished apartment for any difficult situations. You bring your own linens, basically, but it has beds and sofas and that type of
And the
stuff already in
average
it.
stay there is a little longer than the typical Reach shelter?
I do not know.
Don't know.
The rescue mission is maximum of 30 days.
And I know that Reach is only open for a certain amount of time then, so.
And I don't know if
And
we've
the-
ever learned what the Salvation Army has a maximum stay, which is for women and children.
And there is no maximum stay at Reach, I think, I mean, in the average, they stay for quite some time there, so.
Well, it sounds like you got more questions than answers tonight, so, on this part anyway.
For the homeless shelter
Right.
discussion.
And you had mentioned that it didn't break, the other license fees structure in other municipalities don't break it down this far, so how far down does it go? Like, just,
General definitions of a rental unit for most places are similar to ours, and they include hotel motel. That's the only time that I see it delineated down to that level. Some are very vague and just are not occupied by the owner of the building.
You mean they exclude a hotel motel?
No, they include them in their rental licensing program.
There's about 8 or 10 in Maryland.
But we exclude hotels motels.
Correct, we exclude.
Well, you just said that they include.
Correct.
Some do.
Some do.
so we could include hotel motels and,
Yeah, that's coming to you in separate
Yeah, we
legislation.
Oh,
would
that's something
recommend that be
different
a
than
complete
We're
this.
addressing it in a
Not to
different.
lend that.
Correct, because it's
Yeah.
a joint operation with multiple departments to address the
see.
hotels.
But they don't break it down to like homeless shelters, residential care, dormitory.
No, only one identified group home.
Would we include shelters then? Could we take it out of this and include it in the hotel motels?
Isn't that the same exact thing?
I don't know, I mean, I'm.
We're proposing a
I'm saying-
standalone chapter city code if we're gonna do something with hotel motel, not blend it in with rental licensing.
I'm just saying, could you take
I
shelters
gotcha.
out and put shelters in the hotel motel one?
But wouldn't we have the same discussion?
You would, which is the discussion of
So we just
what's
postponing the
level
same
of safety
discussion?
do you want to apply to these places?
I guess the consensus is that we're looking to license, make sure to meet a minimum standard, maybe which program it would fall into seems to be a question. And I'll be honest, it's going to take a little bit of time to get to these units to kind of evaluate them, to see what conditions they're currently in, to see what impact any inspections would have on them.
I mean, I recently volunteered at the Reach Shelter, and to me, you know, it was beautifully kept and clean, and, you know, I would hope that that's the way that the rest of them are.
Pretty much.
But, you know, to Emily's point, they didn't have bread that day, you know, so there was, I mean, they struggle as a nonprofit. So to put something like this on a place that literally did not have bread to give the people that morning, you know, this is kind of painful.
Yeah.
I get it.
I hear you,
I
I'm just
know.
asking, what level of
I know,
minimum
I
safety
know.
standard do you want to apply, if any?
Life safety. Done.
Agree.
Life safety codes. That's enough, that's enough. And definitely not per bed. That's just my opinion.
So we are in favor of the fee per shelter and the dormitory?
I don't think so.
Not per bed, but per room?
At this point, it doesn't sound like you have three in favor of even inspecting the shelter.
How about if we pull the homeless shelter part out of it
I think that's a really good idea.
and let the rest of it be contemplated at the council, and then we'll come back to you with the homeless shelter?
Great idea.
So we can get a sense of consensus on the rest of the issues, because if there's no consensus on this, it will affect, how this is voted on, the whole
You had
thing.
mentioned that the $100, that, you know, maybe that could be basically donated back
Right.
at the end of the year, or whenever, I say the end of the year.
You could put a figure of free in here.
I would just rather not charge it,
Yeah, okay. I would rather not charge it.
Amount.
Pardon me?
To me, it has nothing to do with this, man. You could put zero in there for me and I would be fine with it.
And the life safety thing, is that as far as an inspection?
Yeah, I think.
After we go in and kind of look, no, which sounds terrible to me, but.
Yeah. I don't, I understand the quality of life and life safety things, I just, in this type of scenario, I think the situation that they're in, I mean, the next level down is a tent outside or under a bridge or on a doorstep somewhere, so.
I think we should follow staff's advice and put homeless shelters off until later and let them go take a look at these shelters and let us know whether or not, oh my God, it's a good thing we looked, because let me tell you, two of these places, we didn't believe the condition. We're gonna come back and say, listen, this isn't gonna be a hardship on these people. We took a look at everything, and certainly from a life safety point of view, there's no issues, and we could do a quick look and see. Instead, we'll sit here and debate for an hour what might be, instead of what we can get some more facts on.
And if you want to limit it to just life safety code, it could just be a matter of, it's added to the fire marshal's annual inspections like they do for hotels currently. Where they just look at the life safety and the fire code.
Life safety includes occupancy level.
It would for the fire marshal.
For the fire marshal, sure.
I would be fine with that,
Yeah, they do.
as long as that
Yeah.
component's included.
It wouldn't need to be added to this.
Yeah,
It
we're
could
good.
just be
Completely.
something that's on their list every year they go into the homeless shelters.
Almost just as a courtesy.
That sounds great.
Okay,
Sounds
so
like we're
pull
good.
it out of this.
That was beautiful. That was so beautiful.
Okay.
I would just like to note that we all just agreed on something.
That was,
Did you see that?
that was
Moment of silence.
Maybe I don't, I disagree.
that was lovely.
A discussion that we had last time was the inspection frequency. What was proposed by staff was, we'll say rooming houses, dormitories, and residential care facilities. The exterior inspection would move to 24 months. Currently, it's at 12 months. Interior inspections would move to 24 months. It's currently at 48 months. And then 12 units, which would be all the other structures, rental licensed structures in town. Exterior inspections would move to 36 months, which are currently 12 months, and interior inspections would move to 36 months. And right now, they're at tenant turnover, but no more frequent than every 48 months.
So basically, we're removing the responsibility for the landlord to inform somebody that the tenant has moved out. We're doing away with the move-out inspection.
Yeah, there'll be systematic inspection.
It would be a systematic inspection through
Systematic
there.
every 48
And then
months.
it comes down to what time frame you think is suitable for that. We're proposing 36 months.
And the other jurisdictions.
Does Myersville do it? Do they have landlord registration and inspection of residential?
We have, 2 apartments in town.
Do you inspect them?
One of our employees, who's the zoning administrator, lives in one of them. Does that count?
I mean, if he inspects them, I guess.
So as we said about looking at other jurisdictions and what they do and how do we settle at the 36 months, that I looked at 27 total governing bodies that have a rental licensing program. Ones that are inspected every year, there are 13 governing bodies that do that. Ones that are inspected every 14 months, because Bowie does it every 14 months. I'm really not too sure why. It's
Kind of lunar calendar thing.
Yeah, I don't know. And then inspected every 2 years. I have Bowie listed there again because they say 2 years in their ordinance, but they say 14 months when you talk to them. So I put them in both categories. And then inspected every 3 years. You have 6 governing bodies. Then you have 2 governing bodies that are inspected every 5 years. And then 2 governing bodies have it where the landlord does the inspection and reports that to the municipality. So
Every year list is very interesting, because you throw Cumberland in there, which kind of doesn't follow suit with like that population, you know. When did they start doing it every year?
Cumberland recently changed theirs because they used to be a landlord inspection program where the landlords went and did the inspections of their units and reported them back, and they felt that being unsuccessful. And so they changed it to an annual program. Just for some comparison purposes, if we're looking at who has the same type of rental ownership ratio to compare to Hagerstown, that would be Salisbury and Cambridge when you're looking at those. So Salisbury does it every year, Cambridge does it every 3 years. And then if you're looking at, okay, who has more than 50%, who's at a 50% more rental population than ownership, and then you throw in College Park, Greenbelt, and Hyattsville, along with Salisbury, they do it every year, and then the ones that meet that same qualification is Cambridge, Frostburg, and Laurel that do it every 3 years, that they do a regular inspection.
So if I live in a rental in Greenbelt, people of Greenbelt come in my house once a year. So they have to take off work to allow that to happen or accommodate a schedule. That would be the same here. So every 3 years, at least what you're proposing, there would have to be, someone would be coming in my home every 3 years, no matter what, if nothing changed.
Correct. And it's all in the rights as well, because also different programs have it where in their lease, they say the city's going to come and do an inspection, and the landlord has the right to do the inspection. The landlord can act on the behalf of the tenant to do the inspection, not saying people have to take off work to be there for that inspection.
Because it's the landlord's responsibility, the condition of the unit.
And hopefully they'd want to know.
Well, can I suggest something to help you guys? Because, you know, if you're changing interior inspections and rooming houses, dormitories, homeless shelters, from every 48 months to every 24 months, you're doubling up your workload. Why don't we do dwelling units at every 48 months as opposed to changing it from 48 to 36?
I'm not in favor. I'd rather move 24 to 36.
Probably because you don't have 3 council members in favor of it, Mayor, is my guess.
Why don't we just move the 24-month for the ones up top to 36? And make everything consistent at 36.
Where is on top?
Then you're not
The
doubling
rooming
up your
houses,
workload.
dormitories, residential care facilities is the
Oh,
up top.
up there.
Everything
That
at
top.
36 months, you're saying?
That's what I'm
I have no
saying.
problem with that.
Then that consistently
Can I ask a question?
streamlines your workload.
When the landlord registration program was put into place, 15 years ago now, when you came up with the policy, you had input from the homeowners and landlords association, things like that, right? You had meetings, you had input,
The landlord association,
and you guys came up
that's what they were called.
with this policy. Have you talked to anybody there about this change to every 48 months?
Every 36 months, yes. I talked to the president of the Landlord Association. I didn't get any feedback back from them on that. But here's my concern with reaching out to them. When I talk to these landlords, they do not have property in other jurisdictions that have rental facilities ordinances. So it's, their comparison is no program to a program. I don't get an answer that if someone that actually had licensing, had inspections in another jurisdiction, they could compare something to ours to give me an example to say, this is why I would like to have it this frequently, that would be great. But I just don't have people with that information. They are only used to renting other properties in jurisdictions that do not have a licensing program. So I'm not getting a fair assessment of our program.
But Frederick doesn't have a landlord registration program. They don't do inspections of rental properties.
Correct.
Does Frederick County?
No.
Okay, so Frederick doesn't, Frederick County doesn't, Myersville doesn't, does Middletown?
Well, that's the whole thing, that you have to think too of your census population densities and that type of stuff there, of who actually has a municipal government, and then who has, actual just towns that they might not think of it, because you think of other ones around Baltimore or things of that nature down around the DC area. They have large populations in those towns, but they don't have a governing body that oversees them. There are some counties that have a whole entire rental facility program for their county. So Frederick does not have anything in their programs, so they're hard to
It
compare.
doesn't matter, because you don't have three people sitting right here at this table that want to get rid of rental registration.
And I can still ask a question.
I know, but you're sitting here asking staff useless questions about something that
What is the
isn't gonna
use, wait a
happen.
minute.
It's completely
Why-
useless.
Why is my question useless?
Because it's not gonna happen. You don't have
Because
three
we
people
have
sitting here at this
people,
table
we have
that
people
are
who
going
compare
to
us on a
get rid of
continual
this
basis to
program.
Frederick, and about why can't we be like Frederick? And my question was
Okay.
actually very plain, and I just wanted an answer.
But it's ridiculously rhetorical when we're sitting here as a body talking about changes that enhance the program, not get rid of it. And the two people we interviewed to put on the council, one of the things we asked was that very thing, and I believe both responded to the affirmative, yes, we're gonna keep the program.
Okay, I understand that, but I can still ask a question, and it sure as hell isn't useless.
I just think you're dragging staff through the coals of something that isn't even on the table.
I haven't even begun to do that yet, Kristen, okay?
I mean,
Go
we're
ahead,
not
let's
getting rid of
continue.
code, we're not getting rid of rental registration, so let's just.
Can we
end that
move on to the
discussion.
next issue? Thank you.
Have we decided on the frequency or?
Well, I guess it's every 36 months.
I answer all of them.
Yes, for
So,
everything.
I am in favor, I understand there's a large portion of rentals that we've not been in, and I'm absolutely in favor of figuring out a way to get into them, because I see the problem there. But I've been a renter most of my life, and the thought of someone coming in my house every 3 years, if nothing has changed, bothers me a little bit. Because I mean, my landlord could have, but they never did. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone else agrees with me. That just doesn't sit well with me, but then I understand the point. I'd be interested to see if there's another solution other than pretty much we are coming on this, every 3 years. And tenant turnover, I get it, people aren't reporting it, but is there another solution?
We're the only jurisdiction that does this tenant turnover thing. Everyone else does systematic inspections.
Makes the most
So
sense.
it's a very unique situation here to try to get some sort of comparison too, because there is no comparison.
Plus, we hear constantly from the fire chief, his concerns about occupied units, that there's hoarding, there's overcrowding. And with a tenant turnover process, we don't see that. We see it when it's empty. So
Yeah.
there's some concerns about if we're never getting into certain units and the landlord's not keeping track of what's going on in there, and if the tenants are not living safely in their unit.
Well, I think that, like when I had gone on that building inspection tour and, the property that I had seen that the property owner didn't know about. I mean, I don't know when the last time someone had ever been there, whether there was any code violations, but I mean, that was clearly, a safety issue for the children, for everything that was involved. So, I don't know, as a property owner that doesn't go visit the houses, I can see both sides of it, not wanting someone to come in, but yet there's a house out there that clearly needs someone's help, to live safely.
And most tenants are afraid to call us because they're afraid they're gonna be evicted. When we hear from tenants, it's usually because they have run their course with their landlord and they're ready to get out, and they're looking for ways to avoid having to not get their security deposit back. So then they start, trying to use the government to get at their landlord. But when they wanna stay in the unit, they tend not to wanna call us for fear they will be evicted. So things have to be really bad or whatever before the tenant wants to reach out to us.
Right.
just.
Okay, so we're 36 months, right?
Yeah.
For everything.
Is that for the PEP program too?
Well, we'll get to that
Oh,
one
I'm
here.
sorry. Wrong, I'm skipping
How does
ahead.
everyone feel about the 36 months?
I'm fine.
I'm good with that. I think it makes more sense than the tournament.
You don't agree with 36 months?
It's not,
Does 4 years make a difference to you?
no,
That they're
no,
coming
it's
every
not
4
that I
years?
don't, it's not that I don't agree.
Your concern is a person that's been there, no issue, no question, 13 years, and every 3 years we go in for nothing. And they feel
Yeah.
it's invasive upon them.
Absolutely, I feel it's invasive. I understand the point,
think
and
that's
I'm not,
invasive. Wait
it's,
till we
I'm
get to
not
the next slide.
against the program contrary to belief, but I understand the need, just as someone, I just got out of a rental, I lived there 6 years. And that's my home. I don't know, if you knocked on my door, I'd be like, get away from here. I just feel it is somewhat invasive.
But it is, I mean, it's for the, really, it's for the safety of the community, and if those tenants are great and everything's fine, then that's fine, then they're in there for 5 minutes, and it's a quick inspection, and, you know, it's not meant to invade your privacy, it's part of, you know, safety code.
Is this, I mean, could this be, I hate to use the word tiered again, but is this where you could say that if there's no violations within a certain amount of time, that the inspection schedule is different? I understand why you're trying to, like, put everything on the same schedule, you know, for ease for you guys, but, I mean, just like Emily said, if there's a property owner that doesn't use our services, that doesn't need us as much, can you let them be at 8 years or never or whatever?
It's just a tough, everyone's in a tough position, I know you guys are, it's that battle of like what's over-regulating and what's not, but then you have these situations where we have a fire and there's 10 people in a house that was made for 3 people, and
Right.
so I get it, but I,
May I suggest again that what we're doing here tonight is modifying what already is in the books. And my recollection is this is probably not the first time we've modified this code, okay? What we're finding out now is because of the way we've set it up, that I'm learning what you're saying, that the way we unfortunately have developed this thing, it looks like the people that we are really invading their privacy and causing the problems to, the majority of them are probably the good landlords that you don't think we should be inspecting as frequently. I would suggest that, you know, given the fact that we haven't been in 25% of the rental units in this city, I'm hoping that what you're going to tell me is that when we change this regulation, that the top priority for inspection is going to be the 25% that we've never been in. Is that an accurate statement?
It would be a systematic approach across where we have zones for each inspector.
But why
we
would
break
not
them
our
down.
systematic approach be that we've had this in place for how long?
15 years.
15 years, and 25% of the units have never been inspected? Why would we even think about going back and re-inspecting a unit that has passed before we address the 25% that haven't been inspected?
Yeah, we certainly can do that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I think this addresses what Emily's talking about and what Shelley's talking about. And I know the amount of staff that we have and these problems, but I would like to find out that in whatever time frame it takes, that we hear from staff back saying, okay, now we've inspected every rental property in the city. And then we can start looking at tiers. We can start saying, we would like statistics on how many landlords have never failed an inspection, and how many landlords have never passed an inspection. And then I think you get into a tier system, where you start saying, okay, we've been in existence for 18 years. We have a list of landlords that in 18 years have always been inspected and have never, ever had a problem. We're not going to place that entire group in a different setting than the group that has never passed. That's my suggestion.
Like your house would have
And,
been.
and until,
would've been
and
fine.
until we have inspected every rental unit in the city, we can't come up with a tiered system
So
like that.
basically, everyone starts on the same playing field.
When we say that, my playing field involves that nobody immediately that has passed inspections regularly will be re-inspected before these 25% that have never been inspected are inspected, and then the next tier would be the ones that have been inspected and not passed. If you can do everything in 36 months, everyone in the city, that's great, but the priority has gotta be, when we got a quarter of the rental units in 15 years never been inspected, something tells me that you're gonna find that that's where the majority of our problems are gonna lie, and to not be re-inspecting units that have passed until we get them all down. And then we can looking at all the units and seeing these kinds of statistics. Because I agree with you, I mean, I got a number of rental units in my neighborhood. Right across the street is one, a great investment, it's one getting ready to go on sale, a duplex. These are some of the most sustainable, you know, they have long-term tenants, even when they have turnovers, they go 15, 20 years. I know the landlord shows a number of things, she's probably getting rid of them now, she's a little elderly. But all you gotta do is take a look at a place like that, you know it's been inspected, you know every time it's been inspected, it's passed, or everybody's been fine with it. But until we get the whole city covered, we can't look at those kinds of things, in my opinion. But if we say to staff, absolutely, the 25% that have never been seen have gotta be the first ones, no matter what zone they're in. I don't wanna find my landlord across the street is getting inspected again before somebody who either hasn't registered or has never been inspected gets inspected. That's my attitude.
How many inspectors do we have?
6.
Just trying to figure out the math on 3,000 inspections a year with 6 people. That's 11 a day, 11 and a half a day, divided by 6. It should be able to be done.
It's 2.2 a day taken out, leave that you could take, holidays and working days, it's 2.2 inspections a day.
We're not asking for additional staff.
Okay.
We're not asking.
No, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around 9,000 rental properties over 3 years, being inspected every 36 months is 3,000 a year, and so,
Right. Like
okay.
we all said, we were struggling with math earlier. I got my degree in math.
Oh, yeah. And
You
Mayor,
come up with 2.2 like that
and my
is-
proposal will be that we'll be back here in some time frame. I don't know when it will be, because I don't know how long it will take staff to do this.
Well, I should have asked Kristen if that was an appropriate question
Oh,
first, I'm sorry,
goodness.
so.
But to try to get to where you're talking about, where we're all talking about, which is identifying those landlords that we don't need to be nearly as interested in, and identifying those landlords who we really need to be interested in. And we know right now, you know, if we had a list of every landlord in this city and every property management thing, we couldn't identify them all, but we could certainly look at it and say, well, that's gonna be a problem, that's gonna be a problem, this probably won't. And when we get the proper statistics, we can do that, and we can put in a tier system, like we tried to do with the crime-free apartments and making everybody go to those classes and whatever, and we came up with some methods to lay off the good landlords. That's my only thought process.
If we decide to move forward with what we're proposing, we could put in the motion of approval that the first priority for this new inspection system would be the ones that have never been inspected.
Or a certain, I would like a certain time period, because, we have some that we inspected in 2004, and I'm pretty sure that was, I mean, that's the last time we've been in, I'm pretty sure those conditions have changed. I mean,
Right.
the one that Councilman McIntyre went to, we inspected a year and a half before that
Oh,
condition
my
happened to
gosh.
that level. So, and we had an apartment building that, every unit was condemned, and the landlord, invested in the money, rehabbed all the buildings, but did not, do maintenance to it, deferred maintenance, and the fire department was out to on Saturday for the ceiling collapsing in that place and landing on the person. And that was no more than 2 years ago. So conditions change very quickly inside
I
these units if
understand,
maintenance
which
is
makes me
deferred.
wonder what conditions are like in places that have never been inspected at all. Because none of us believe that a quarter of the rental units in this city have not had a turnover in 15 years. Which means if they're registered with you, there's a reason they're not letting us know that they're having tenant turnover. If their apartments were in a condition that didn't need work done on them, and they're already paying the licensing fee for this, then I don't see why they wouldn't be notifying us of tenant turnover. So I've got to assume that a large percentage of a quarter of these units have had tenant turnovers, have not notified us. And yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but how can you, I'm especially referring to those who have passed in the past, how do you go and re-inspect them while you still have units that you know are in violation because they haven't notified us of a tenant turnover, but we're not gonna look at them? That just flies in the face of everything we're trying to do. It rewards the bad landlords and it punishes the good landlords, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. And I understand things can change in 6 months. Things can change very quickly, but.
But if the first priority was the 25%, 25% that have never been inspected, plus units that have not been inspected in 4 years, in 5 years, whatever.
Yeah, start with, but you could still have.
Well, when you say in
I
4 years,
36
we
and
had
then
an every 48-month inspection scheduled, didn't we? So that just puts you
That
right
was
back
next
with
year.
No, we had no, we didn't have a 48 months.
How often was it?
There wasn't a.
Just doing tenant turnover.
It's tenant turnover,
Oh,
which is why I asked a question about talking to the landlord association
So you
about
could keep the,
this change in policy, that's all.
Yeah, I know what the landlord association is gonna say. When they become a responsible group, I'd be interested in hearing from them. That's my answer.
I would like, I agree. I think it would be great if we could do the ones that you've never done and then start on a time frame of
Yeah.
how long it's been. You know, if you have ones 10 years, 9 years, all the way up. I think that's the order that it
you
should
could
be.
start with, you could still have 36 months as your
Yeah.
basic time
If we
frame,
can
but
do
you
it.
just, you prioritize how you do it, that's
Yeah.
all.
And then report back to the council within 6 months, 9 months,
Yeah,
whatever.
I think
to let
we're
you
all
know how it's
really
gone.
curious to know what you're finding in the 25% of these units that have never been seen. I'm really curious. They may be fine.
And take pictures.
Can we take pictures?
We have a lot of pictures on the computer.
Yeah.
All right, can we move on then to the next issue?
Okay, so it's right of entry, so let's say if we're moving forward with systematic inspections, and as Councilmember Metzner mentioned, we're not getting into these types of units, if we're being denied access, the authority to have the ability to apply for administrative search warrant to get access into these units. If we're not being invited in, the only means that we have to obtain a warrant now is if we know of code violations at the property. If we've never been in it, we can't obtain a warrant for code violations if we've never been in it. So it's creating a clause to allow the standard to be if we're being denied access, we can obtain a warrant through that means.
I have no problem with that.
Oh, my God.
And by the way, if you want to talk to the landlords association, please talk to them about their opinion on our tier tax system too.
I believe that you already have that authority.
Only for property maintenance violations to obtain a warrant for those. And
So we have to know that there's a problem.
we have to know there's a problem, has to be something
So
that
let's
leads to
think
there's a
about
problem.
this. We're gonna inspect properties every 36 months, okay? We will have the landlord, permission to do this because he is part of the landlord rental registration program.
They're the
He
responsible
understands
party.
that every 36 months, he's gonna be inspected or as close to that as possible. And why would we not get the landlord and the city together, like asterisk point number 2 here, to get the warrant for the landlord to let the city in to do the inspection as opposed to us getting a warrant to
We
go
wouldn't,
in
Mayor.
and do
We
that.
would
what-
get the
that's
warrant
what
if the
you
Well,
would-
that's
landlord,
not what the first thing says,
the
Lou.
landlord doesn't let us in.
It's the landlord.
But the landlord is gonna, well, I mean, isn't there any other recourse for us at 36 months if the landlord doesn't let us in to do an inspection?
How are we gonna get
No.
in?
It's not the landlord that we're concerned about, it's what if the tenant refuses to let us in?
Okay,
And the
Again.
and I agree with you. If the tenant says no, we should go to the landlord.
right.
I agree with
The
you. Mayor.
landlord
If
says
the
no, that's a
landlord
different
says no,
story.
then we gotta go.
But asterisk number 1 does not speak about the landlord not letting us in. It speaks about the tenant, and then us going to get a warrant to go in.
How often does it happen that the tenant does not let us in?
Well, we don't do,
We don't do systematic inspections on knocking on doors.
So
It's-
even if it's like a
Because we're
property,
doing the
like a
tenant turnover.
code violation?
We're doing it at turnover. I mean, if they report a complaint about their property, they let us in.
yeah.
So are you gonna be sending out notification?
Correct. The way most jurisdictions do this, since they do a systematic approach, and it was a thing that we did back in the 90s here when we did systematic inspections through the community enhancement program, is that you send a notification out saying, no matter what time period, 30 days from now, 60 days from now, 90 days from now, I will be in your area conducting these inspections. Please contact me to schedule these inspections. You send this to the property owner so that they schedule it, because you put a clause in the lease, however, that I'm to come in for periodic inspections as the landlord to do these. You can invite other parties in to do that. You work with the landlord. We're still working with the landlord for all these inspections. We're not knocking on doors, just showing up at the property, knocking on a door to do an inspection. This is all a coordinated thing. The landlord has to post notices that they would do an inspection in 24 hours, or could give notice to the tenant that I'll do it on this day. It's been scheduled with the city, so
A good
everything's
example
scheduled.
Is it housing, public housing?
I'm fine with that now. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure we weren't just gonna show up knocking
Oh,
someone's door.
no, this is
No,
no
you might not be
surprise.
home.
No, this isn't a surprise, because unlike the public housing, who, you talk to people who live there, and they know when the inspection's coming, and there's a lot more onus on the tenant, because the tenant can get kicked out of public housing if they don't pass the inspection because of the way they've done it. So you'll hear these people on social media, otherwise my inspection's coming, I'm cleaning up. Our folks don't have to worry about that, because it's not about the tenant, it's about the landlord. It's about that condition, and I mean, if tenants want to, you will have problems, I guess, with the hoarders who won't want to let you in. But no, I totally agree, Mary, you go to the landlord before you seek an administrative
All right.
warrant.
We would. It would
Yeah.
always be, and that's a very last resort. It would be multiple letters of request and documentation before obtaining a
I think
warrant.
we've all lived here long enough to know how long it takes for us to get to a courtroom for anything, let alone something like
Well, and
this.
I think that if they're in the program, I mean, they voluntarily been in this licensing program, that they understand when the inspection is going to take place, and they've already, right, there's a disclosure that says, okay, you're gonna be inspected every 36 months or whatever.
Well, there's another slide in here that talks about that, having that in the lease, so.
Correct.
But again, I
keep
mean,
reading
and not that I don't trust staff, but I don't want staff entering in a place with a warrant without a landlord there. I honestly, if it was criminal activity and the police department goes to the judge and gets a warrant, different story, but for
Well,
us to go in,
But what you're really saying, Mayor, is you don't want an administrative warrant unless the landlord refuses us access.
Exactly.
Because if the landlord refuses us
landlord, right,
access,
right.
if he refuses us access, we don't have to wait for him to come with us.
And
That's
the
fine.
The second bullet point, the way I understand that is, the landlord has no problem letting us in, but the tenant won't. So we're obtaining a warrant on behalf of the property owner?
Correct. To make the repairs.
Okay.
So if we did an inspection, landlord let us in to do an inspection, and we identified deficiencies in that unit, but the tenant's denying access for the landlord to make those repairs, we know that they need to make these repairs. They've been identified as one, the tenant keeps on denying access. It's a way that we can obtain a warrant for them to get them access into that unit so that they can actually do these repairs and get everything code compliant.
that's not what the first asterisk says.
The first access says that we're denied access for the required inspection.
Well, I think we all understand.
We can word it differently so it's more clear that we're making these
landlord's
arrangements
preference.
with the landlord.
It's always the last resort. The landlord's always consulted before obtaining a warrant, always.
Cool. So you have no argument.
Okay. Don't think there will be too much discussion on this slide. Essentially, it's looking for exemption requirements. Essentially, we're looking at everything at 36 months. So we talked about, it would be moving new construction to 36 months from the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. And then existing construction, we currently have no exemption for, when existing home, or like existing structures are brought up to the PEP standard, the high standard that we would like to see houses at in this community, there's no exemption for these. So when we've had these nice remodels done in town, they're immediately into the
Like the
program.
student housing at Patterson Hall had to go right into the program.
What are they exempt from?
Does it exempt them from the program?
They're not exempt from anything during our, as far as the licensing program goes, for those items. They're immediately into the program and have inspections.
But if you have, I mean, use Patterson Hall as a perfect example. If you have tenants there who move out because they've graduated from the USMH, then you're gonna have an inspection on that property,
Well,
tenant
this
turnover.
is talking about in the very beginning, after you've fully renovated the property
Right.
and brought it up to PEP standards, to a
Right.
pretty high standard, for the first 36 months, you
You're
don't
not
have
even
to be in the program.
You're not even in the
Right.
program.
Because
You're
That's not what Kristen asked.
You're not in what program?
rental licensing.
Oh, okay, so
Right now, it's
So you're not even in the
only
program
new
for 3
construction
years.
that's.
you're not getting
given-
inspected anyway.
Right.
Yeah, but you still have to pay, you
The
still
annual
have to
fee.
pay.
Yeah.
So basically you're exempt from
From everything for 3 years.
paying.
From paying, yes.
So then there would be an inspection at the 36-month mark
I'm
after
just trying to
their
figure out what
exemption
the
is
great
over with?
benefit is.
That's when they would start to
Their
need to be
benefit is
licensed.
They would be
there.
in the
They don't have to
program
pay.
then.
They don't have to pay to be in the program.
So right now, we just do provide this
And
capability
we
to
were
brand new
doing,
buildings.
we were doing yearly exteriors, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Still are to that.
so that would be out too.
Proposing to go to 36 months, but it's yearly
Right.
now.
Do we have to do 36 months on this? Can we, like, they're already at the high-level PEP standards. I don't know. Does this one have to be 36? Be a little longer? Like 48, because they're exempt for 36 months, right?
Well, and again, all I can say is if we get the statistical base of what we have, we're not even dealing with these people for 3 years from now before they have to worry about it. And so we got that time to take a look at all this stuff and refine it. Because those folks, you're right, they're not gonna be involved for many years to begin with. And then again, you get into other issues, you know, when you got the university system, it's one thing, but you all just said, you know, 1 year and what you found. And new construction can be new apartments, you know, and new apartments can be completely trashed in 3 months. It doesn't take long at all. You see Patterson Hall and you see where we're building now, and you go, well, we probably don't need to do it as frequently, but again, I think if you get a statistical base on this, you can come up with tiers.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Like Councilmember Metzger said, we can go for 36 months right now, and then in the 3-year time period, see where we stand on any types of conditions that exist, and look for other ways to tier things out for as far as inspections and the program and fees and things of that nature.
Because we got so long until anybody starts looking at those units that we don't really need to be
And we
over.
just felt that it was a fairness issue. And if you've renovated an
Right.
existing building up to a pretty high standard, should you also be exempt from a program just like brand-new construction is?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Makes sense.
One of the other items that the mayor had mentioned was, you know, adding in the lease provision. Currently, we have different lease provisions in the rental facilities ordinance. It was just creating the provision that they have in their lease to allow access for inspections.
Absolutely.
The tenant's supposed to allow the access for the inspection.
That was in my lease, so I read it.
There's a DirecTV in, it certainly let us in.
The item that was discussed during last week was some revocation language. Looked at other jurisdictions and what they have some bullet points here for what I've seen in other jurisdictions. Basically to go down those, including language of not being compliant with the MDE lead laws to revoke a license, denying entry for inspection required by the program, and then ability to require rental units vacated when the license is revoked, posting the property as a revoked license and removing the placard is subject to a fine. Failure to make the corrections can result in revocation of a license. And then some municipalities have it where the department can abate those violations. And then also reinstatement fees, we're proposing $500, but they vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Those are some of the languages, and then just what do some of the jurisdictions do. That was on the next slide. That, as you can see, that to vacate the revoked licensed properties, there are a number of jurisdictions that they require that, and then the ones that do not require vacating the revoked licenses. And then also we have ones that, that they are to, if they do require the vacating, that they give 60 days to those jurisdictions. And then there's some that go down as far as returning the security deposit to the tenants. And then some jurisdictions have it where you post a placard, and then also what the reinstatement fees vary in reapplying for a license or paying new license fees. So it's more or less just kind of what do other jurisdictions do, and throwing it out to you all for discussion and seeing what you would like to add. Currently, what's in the revoke language is that we can only revoke a license if there are property maintenance violations. In the last 12 years, we have not revoked any licenses.
And even if we did, the way we're set up now, it doesn't empty the property, it just makes you in violation of the code.
Correct.
So you're subject to fines, but the property could still be occupied.
Now, I thought I read somewhere in our stuff that failure to comply is $1,000 fine,
Up to.
Up to 1,000. It can be.
and that's a daily event?
Can be.
Okay. So when I ask about South Potomac Street, what fines have been levied on the property owner?
We received current judgments of $13,000 in fines for failure to correct violations, and we received a $1,000 fine for failure to report turnovers.
Wow, so there's $14,000 in judgments against the
That was in the
property
last,
owner?
that was in the last month. I do not know what they'd go back any further than that. That was in the last month.
Just in the last month?
Because it was based off all of our inspections that we had done during that event that occurred.
Well, congratulations, okay, because at our last meeting, I was really concerned because I don't know why I got the impression, but the impression I had was if they didn't register, they got a $100 fine, and that was the end of it.
That is.
There's a late fee.
But that's not the penalty, which is $1,000 a day for noncompliance, up to $1,000 a day, right?
It can be, dude.
I understand that you don't necessarily want to go out and fine people $1,000 a day for every day they're not in compliance. Having said that, however, that ability is a far cry from being toothless. What you just described as the $14,000 in judgments arising out of this issue, to me, is a substantial penalty, not just a slap on the wrist. And I commend staff for that. And I certainly was not under the impression that we were taking those kinds of actions against these landlords. And I don't know what you do about, other than revoke under the circumstances that are in this first bullet. I would want to spend a whole lot more time talking about the circumstances when we would empty tenants out. You know, I think that gets back to you, Emily, about this is where people live and the fault of the landlord. You know, in the same respect, it's obvious that if the place is, like we had on South Potomac Street, was condemned, I mean, that's a no-brainer. That goes so far beyond rental registration that it's not even close. And I would like to think, in my brain, that you would pretty much have to get up to these really nasty life and safety violations, like what we had over there, to say people are out right now, just like we have whenever we do condemnation. I certainly would not say we should put people out on the street that are tenants just upon revocation, especially when we have these other things that we can use. I'm not sure, other than life safety, that I would want to do that.
And just as far as like, as you mentioned, if a condemnation, unsafe situation, staff work diligently to try to find these people other alternative housing. We work closely with the Homeless Coalition to provide them with that information.
And
We'll
I
call
know
and make
you do.
appointments with people
Right.
for them to get them in locations if there's a situation that we do have to condemn them.
I like the idea of requiring the security deposit to be returned.
just from our perspective, we're not in favor or against of the vacating, it's just what different jurisdictions
Right,
do.
understand.
So it's, I'm leaving that up to you all for
Also, we
discussion
were
there.
hearing that there was a desire for stronger penalties.
Yes,
For the problem
and I really would bring
situations.
that up, and again, I'm the first one to say, when I realize, when you tell me this property got $14,000 levied against it, I think that is a substantial penalty, and I'm glad to hear that we have them. I was just not under the impression at our last meeting that we had that in our toolbox, and we do, and I think that's substantial. I'm assuming that state law would say that if there was a tenancy that had children in there that weren't compliant with lead laws, that would have to be shut down immediately.
Well, the state law requires that when any property is to be licensed with a jurisdiction that has a licensing body, they're to provide the current lead paint numbers to us. I'll be honest, I've reviewed those applications for years, and I know those numbers are not accurate. We've done an inspection, and they're reporting something 3-4 years ago. So it's just kind of saying, okay, we got to get the accurate information in here. And I've called the state, you call the state, you get one person, they say they have no record. You call another person, they say, oh, it was this date. So
I'm
it's
just curious.
getting accurate information to make sure they're not being fraudulent on their applications.
My take on things is I like the fact of what you're telling me you've done with the fines, and I would only remove tenants in a situation that was life safety myself.
Like, what would be an example that would happen? Other than like the building is condemned, but what would be another reason that we would revoke a license and vacate?
If you find these buildings aren't in working order.
Well,
No running water, no sewer, right?
Some
You
of the
would-
pictures you showed us.
correct. The difference about this that we're talking about is that they're not compliant with licensing, would be revoking their license. The same conditions would still apply if they have violations that are unsafe for someone to be in there. We would still require the properties to be vacated. All this is saying is if you're not licensed in our program, you're to vacate your property.
No, I don't think any of us agree with that. Not when you tell me you can fine them up to $1,000 a day. And I, again, understand that you don't do that routinely.
Doesn't mean that we collect it.
Well, I understand, but that, let's say this about that, and maybe our attorneys can give us some advice when you say we don't collect it. We now have a $14,000, do we have a judgment against this property? Or we just put is there an actual judgment on it? Well, you know what you can do with judgments, don't you? You can sell properties. So, when you say you can't collect it, you can put the damn place up for sale. As a judgment creditor. So that's the way you can handle that. That's how you solve that problem. You put the property up for sale as a judgment creditor if they don't pay it. Because eventually, that's what's gonna happen. If you got a judgment earning 10% per annum at $14,000 starting with, and they decide they're not gonna pay it, what do you think the property owner's gonna get out of it in 10 or 15 years when they sell it? But the answer is, you can put it up for sale. You can threaten that. You can work out something.
You could include an immediate, execution of an immediate inspection. Right?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
Let's say somebody says, you know what, no, I'm not paying that money. Not when you're being a program, and what you're saying is the alternative is, that you don't want the place vacated, but you want to place a fine against it. That still doesn't accomplish the base task here, which is
Inspecting and making sure it's fine. So you also put in the law,
So what I'm saying is,
administrative search warrant.
right, you place that administrative.
You ask the tenant first if the tenant will let you come in.
And
to inspect.
that's done immediately. In other words, if you don't want to be in it, and we're gonna place the fine, and we're not gonna vacate, but we are going to place the fine, and we're gonna execute an immediate inspection.
I agree.
And what's gonna happen at the end of that is by and not, you're gonna find some that within that immediate inspection.
Yeah, takes away
that
the
then-
incentive.
That then provides you the opportunity, for closure in those events that closure does need to occur.
I agree. Makes a lot of sense.
That way it solves your concern of not
having removal occur, but addresses your concern that you're not, you're not getting from the process that you're attempting getting in the first place.
So if they don't pay the license fee,
Yes.
They don't
And you
register
fine.
it.
You don't require, evacuation, but you do execute immediate inspection.
And then, one of the things, it kind of goes along with Councilman Rothschild brought up before with substantial fees, if you are revoked or something. You had mentioned before about paying tapping fees, repaying tapping fees, that type of thing. I couldn't find anything along those lines, but there were reinstatement fees that if your license was revoked, you pay a substantial fee to get back into the program so that you're licensed and compliant and not subject to fines.
I think that's good, because otherwise, I'm not gonna pay the fee.
Right. I agree.
Until you get after me, and then I'll pay the fee.
And what's the fee, 500?
I went with what an average between, they varied from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. They were 250 was the low end and 800 was the high end. I just shot in the middle and gave you a number, but you can honestly come up with whatever one you want.
so this would only be if we actually shut the property down, I guess.
It would be if the license would be revoked.
Is 500 too lenient? A bit-
I guess we would still have situations where we would revoke the license, but the property wouldn't be vacated.
Right.
Just as we do
Exactly.
now.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're not gonna vacate unless it's life safety.
Yeah. People with putting up an apartment behind a boiler with no other way out, that kind of thing. Which we see.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's it. Very good.
Okay.
Good job.
Yeah, with the city attorney, I don't know whether or not this would be ready for an introduction on the 24th, or if it'll be May.
Take your
Yes.
time.
Did you feel like a bit of stress relief now after this 3-week, like, hours-long?
City administrator's
Is it like
comments?
over?
I have no additional comments, Mayor.
Great. Emily?
I just wanted to say that I got to go to Antietam Academy today. I've visited there several times, but I hung out with their art teacher, Michael McGinnis, and he's got a really interesting art room there. If you guys have a chance, you should go check it out. Antietam Academy has a lot of kids that have trauma and different situations. And so he's created this very calming art room. He plays ambient music the whole time. He doesn't turn the fluorescent lights on. It's like these really cool lights and cloud lights, and it's a very calming atmosphere. He's got sensory items like this bowl full of beads that you can kind of play with your hands, which I found was interesting when I first walked in, but then I spent about 2.5 hours there, and every single kid that went in the room went and like played with this and calmed themselves. And their behavior in this classroom and out of the classroom, because I went to another area as well, was significant. So it was interesting, because we all know, as we're learning, kids don't learn all the same way. And here you have this very high stressful, high tension environment, and they would go in this art room and just this very calming experience. They'd listen, they were respectful, and it was awesome. So shout out to him for taking that approach to try to help mold those children.
It's a great school.
Kristen?
I only have one thing. This is the letter that I had indicated at our end of March meeting that I'd like the city clerk or Danny to mail to the Stadium Authority, clarifying the position that was taken by this body as it relates to the deliberations we've had on the funding potential available for another stadium study. I don't think that I need council's authorization to send that, but you have been CC'd to receive a copy. And with that, I gotta go.
Austin?
I got to attend the Eagle Scout ceremony end of last week. Tim Mason and Adam Harbert, and present them certificates on behalf of the city. And it was great to see the level of caring and just I haven't been involved in scouting in many, many, many years, and it was just very, very nice to see that it's still alive and well.
It's awesome.
Well, along with what Emily said, hopefully, these last couple of weeks, we've had the ability to have luncheon meetings at the museum and at the library. As I told our two new council members, I generally find those are two of the finer luncheons we have every year, not because of the food and the location, but really being informed of just what these organizations do. And I think one thing that we got at the museum today was what you're saying, Emily, that art is a vital component of education, of our economy, of everything. And it's also makes for good talk and discussion, a la our cultural trail on the pod, which I agree with what I heard over there. It's rare on a nice day that you drive by the park and don't see kids climbing all over the pod. So I'm glad that our Board of Education found that something like Barbara Ingram is an important aspect. And just to throw it out, the other important aspect that unfortunately our schools have totally gotten away from and then can't understand about ADHD is physical education. It is an absolute crime in our country today that our children don't get physical education in schools at all. Time period, just call it a time period to blow off steam and exercise.
Yeah.
If we just don't give them any more, and then we can't understand. We take out all the open windows, especially for anybody who went to North High, take out all the open areas, all the area spaces, all the windows, close them all in, don't give them any physical education, and then wonder why they sort of lose concentration during the day. That's my spiel.
So this weekend is the grand opening for the golf course. I say grand opening. So the golf course is opening this weekend. I think Emily may be playing golf. So Emily and I are going to be there on Saturday morning, time to be determined. Yeah, and do, a little bit of promotion for it. So I don't play golf. I am not athletic at all, but I can definitely videotape very well, I think.
And I don't do mornings, so the 8:30 on Saturday.
Yeah, well, we're gonna
come
work on
on.
that. So, anyway, give the golf course some attention and love. It is beautiful views off of that deck, and I think that, come out and see us. So,
you're gonna be there.
yeah, I will. If I can talk Emily into being there as early as I wake up, which is not as easy as it sounds. So, yeah, I'm excited about it. That's it.
All right, all I have is Thursday night is opening night for the Hagerstown Suns. First pitch is at 6:05.
Throwing it out?
Well, first pitch for the ball game.
What about you?
I am throwing the first pitch out. But temperature game time is supposed to be 70 and sunny.
Yeah.
So it's a good night to come out for the first game of the season. I request, if you haven't read this letter yet that Kristen just handed, please read it and see that you're okay with him sending it, because basically he's doing exactly what he's accusing me of doing, which is speaking for you. So I would read that first before I would say, and before I would authorize anyone to send this letter. Period. He can send it if he wants to, but it can't be on his letterhead, and it sure can't have speaking for the other 4 council members at this table. So, read the letter.